Previously, in the suburban town of Pennsylvania, the murders kept increasing, the numbers counted, and the truth refused to stay buried. Now, in part 2, the truth will reveal. The killers step into the open, the rituals grow darker, and the final page begins to write itself. Welcome back to Dark Pulse, where every secret has a price. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is right now. And make sure you're subscribed because the truth will not wait. Riverton didn't wake gently. It woke like a body gasping after drowning. News of Rafe Nolan's arrest spread faster than the morning fog, whispered at the diner, shouted across the courthouse lawn, muttered in pews at St. Jude's. For the first time, the town believed the shadow killer wasn't a shadow at all, but a man in handcuffs. But Sullivan knew better. Nolan was a blade, not a hand. Tools didn't choose their targets, they just finished the job. In the interrogation room, Nolan sat cuffed, silent, his face as blank as drywall. Sullivan lit a cigarette and let the silence stretch. Lena watched through the glass, her notebook ready. "You killed Emily Hartman," Sullivan said flatly. Nolan shrugged. "You've got the science. Why ask me?" "Because science tells us how. I want to know why." Nolan's eyes flicked up. "Why is expensive? You don't have the budget." Sullivan leaned in. "Then give me the discount version." For the first time, Nolan almost smiled. She was loud. Louder than the family could afford, that's all. "Margaret Hartman paid you," Sullivan pressed. Nolan didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He just looked back at the clock on the wall, like time was his lawyer. By noon, Evelyn Whitmore's legal team filed motions for dismissal. They claimed the DNA was mishandled, the photos doctored by rogue technicians, the federal raid politically motivated. The courthouse buzzed with reporters, microphones like bayonets feeding the narrative war. Sullivan and Lena slipped into a side alley to breathe. "She's turning it into a circus," Lena muttered. "Good," Sullivan said. "Circuses draw crowds. Crowds mean eyes. Eyes mean less room for shadows." But privately, he knew Evelyn wasn't rattled. She was recalculating. That evening, Claudia showed up at Sullivan's office with a laptop hugged to her chest. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. "I went deeper into the override logs," she said. "You were right. Philip wasn't the only one editing files. There's another user ID. Not Whitmore, not Hartman, someone higher." "Higher than Evelyn?" Lena asked. Claudia nodded. "The system labeled it as state admin. That means someone at the Attorney General's office signed off on the tampering." The room fell silent. Riverton's corruption wasn't local anymore. It reached past the county line, into the state itself. Sullivan stubbed out his cigarette. So the Whitmores and the Hartmans weren't just playing their own game, they were being protected. "And if that protection's gone?" Lena asked. "Then the whole house of cards falls," Sullivan said. "And they'll burn every piece of evidence before that happens." 2 days later, Margaret Hartman cracked. During her grand jury testimony, under the weight of Sarah's affidavit and Claudia's forensics, she broke down sobbing. "Yes, I told Nolan to meet her. Yes, I told him to make it quick. I didn't want Emily dead. I wanted her quiet. She wouldn't stop digging, wouldn't stop prying into our accounts. She wanted to drag us all into the mud. I was trying to protect my family." The room held its breath as she confessed, the pearls in her hands snapping one by one, beads scattering across the floor. When she was led out, Richard Hartman stared straight ahead, his face stone. Daniel buried his face in his hands. Sarah wept silently on the witness bench. The headline wrote itself, "Margaret Hartman confesses in daughter's murder." But Evelyn's smirk on the courthouse steps the next morning told Sullivan everything. Margaret was the perfect sacrifice. Her confession would soak up the outrage, leaving Evelyn's empire standing. That night, Sullivan sat in the diner with Lena, the jukebox humming low. "She confessed," Lena said. "That should feel like closure." "Why doesn't it?" "Because Evelyn's still standing," Sullivan replied. "And people like Evelyn don't survive scandals by chance. They survive because they plan 3 moves ahead." Lena leaned closer. "So what's her next move?" Sullivan took a long drag from his cigarette. "She'll cut a deal, offer names bigger than Riverton, and the state will take it because they'd rather trade blood than lose power." The next morning, Sullivan's prediction came true. Evelyn's attorneys announced she was cooperating with federal investigators. "Mrs. Whitmore has been unfairly maligned," the statement read. "She is committed to assisting the investigation into systemic corruption that extends far beyond Riverton." On the evening news, Evelyn appeared calm, poised, almost saintly. "I will not be the scapegoat for a network of men who profited while I tried to protect this town," she told the cameras. Lena threw a pen across the squad room. "She's turning herself into the hero." Sullivan exhaled smoke. "Heroes and villains are costumes. She'll wear whatever keeps her alive." That night, a package arrived at the station. No return address. Inside was a VHS tape, grainy, marked with a single word: garden. Sullivan found an old player and hit play. The footage was shaky, shot from the east fence of the Hartman lot. Emily appeared, her face tense, her journal in hand. Margaret was visible, pearls glinting under the sodium lights. And behind her, half hidden in shadow, Evelyn Whitmore. The tape caught Emily's voice, trembling but clear. "You don't scare me, I'll go to the press." Then Evelyn's voice, sharp and cold. "Not if we get there first." The tape cut to static. Sullivan rewound it 3 times. He felt the weight of Emily's words, the courage in her voice, the certainty in Evelyn's threat. "This is it," Lena whispered. "The missing piece. Proof Evelyn wasn't just covering up after the fact. She was there." Sullivan lit another cigarette, the smoke curling around the screen. "Then it's not just Margaret's story anymore. It's Evelyn's too. And Riverton won't survive both." The next morning, he handed the tape to Agent Monroe. "It's not perfect," Sullivan admitted. "Grainy, old, but it's enough to break her mask." Monroe nodded grimly. "It'll do more than that. It'll break the deal she's trying to cut." And for the first time in weeks, Sullivan felt the story bending not toward shadows, but toward light. Agent Monroe screened the VHS in a federal conference room that smelled like toner and old coffee. The audio hissed, the picture wavered, but the shapes were undeniable. Emily with her journal, Margaret in pearls, Evelyn half in shadow, voice cold enough to cut glass. "Not if we get there first." When it ended, no one spoke. The silence felt heavier than a verdict. Monroe broke it. "This kills the cooperation deal." "Good," Sullivan said. "She doesn't get to buy sainthood with other people's sins." They moved fast. A new warrant. A second raid. Tight, boring, thorough, the kind that doesn't break chain of custody. The agents boxed computers, burned drive images, labeled every cable tie like scripture. James Whitmore folded quickly, signing a proffer, admitting what Rachel's bruises already knew. Evelyn asked for water and a better chair. Outside, Riverton swelled with cameras. True crime podcasts parked next to church vans. Headlines crawled with DNA evidence, murder investigation, corruption scandal, small town secrets. The serial killer myth bled out on the pavement. This was a conspiracy in two voices, not a lone monster in an alley. At the afternoon hearing, Evelyn entered wearing county khaki like couture. She kept her chin high as Monroe submitted the tape. Claudia authenticated the audio envelope's chain, and Sullivan identified the voices. Evelyn's attorney objected to the century-old format, to the weather in 1999, to anything that could delay gravity. The judge listened, impatient but careful, then said, "Bail is denied." The gallery exhaled as if someone had unpinned a grenade. On the courthouse steps, the town divided into choirs. Some shouted "lock her up," others hissed "witch hunt." Sullivan lit a cigarette he didn't have time to enjoy. Lena stood beside him, eyes flicking over faces, counting who looked at them like prey. "Where's Margaret?" she asked. "Segregated," he said. "Jail put her on watch. She's confessed and she's rich. That makes you a target for yourself. Think she'll recant?" "She'll rewrite," he said. "People like Margaret curate their own regret." That night, Sarah Hartman sat alone in the safe house kitchen, folding and unfolding a paper napkin until it shredded in her hands. "She was my mother," she whispered when Sullivan checked in. "I keep waiting to remember something that makes it make sense." "Betrayal never makes sense," he said. "It just makes instructions." "What kind of instructions?" "Don't be the person who needs a town to stay silent so you can breathe." He left her with that, then drove to the bridge where Emily had been found. The water moved like it always had. That was the most unnerving thing about rivers. Crimes pass, rivers don't. By morning, Evelyn adjusted tactics. She fired her local counsel and imported a white shoe team in navy suits that looked ironed from the inside. They filed motions at a speed that made the clerk's wrists ache. They wanted the tape suppressed, Claudia impeached, Sullivan sanctioned, Monroe limited. The courthouse calendar gasped for air. Claudia kept working. She brought Monroe a tidy memo on the state admin's signature, hashes, timestamps, a table that kept its promises. "No names," she said, "but the credentials mapped to a deputy in the AG's office." Monroe nodded once and made a call that used the word internal twice. Just before lunch, Sullivan received a text from an unknown number. "Stop turning graves into stages." He pocketed the phone, then checked the station perimeter. Fear made cops sloppy. He couldn't afford that. In the afternoon, he and Lena visited the library with a thank you note and a fresh lock for the back stacks. Ms. Cortez, the librarian, accepted both with a smile that had seen better budgets. "Emily loved this place," she said, fingers on the new key. "She said shelves keep secrets safer than people do." "They did," Sullivan said, "until we needed them to talk." When they stepped outside, a sedan idled at the curb. The driver wore a cap low. The passenger held up a handwritten sign against the window. "Deep Archivist." Sullivan motioned them into the alley. A woman in her 50s got out, face scrubbed of makeup, eyes rimmed with fear. "I'm not a hero," she said immediately. "I'm a clerk. I file things. I kept a copy of the VHS because the Hartmans paid to have the camera removed that week, and my boss called it routine. Routine felt like theft, so I added one more routine. Mine." "You sent the drive," Lena said softly. "I mailed 6, the woman replied. "I didn't know which truth would survive." Sullivan nodded like a benediction. "You just made it harder to kill." She vanished back into traffic before gratitude could paint a target on her back. That evening, the Whitmore mansion went dark except for one upstairs lamp. From the street, Sullivan watched James Pace, a man unmoored from the script he'd rehearsed for years. He expected a plea, a transfer, a slow grind toward court. He didn't expect the door to open at midnight and a young staffer to stumble out, hands shaking with a shoebox full of flash drives and printed emails. He handed it to Sullivan like a hot coal. "She made us print everything," the kid said. "Hard copies don't crash." "That's what she always said," he swallowed. "I don't want to be brave anymore." Inside the shoebox, donor lists that matched Victor's ledgers, burner schedules, a calendar with gala. Midnight handoff circled twice. On one page, Evelyn's tidy note, "Rachel unreliable. Solution Friday." The page smelled faintly of perfume and power. By dawn, Monroe's task force had names to follow beyond Riverton. The story that started as a murder mystery now had tentacles, contracts, judges, lobbyists, true crime that paid salaries. The headlines shifted. Small town, big scandal. The state AG's office announced an independent review, which was an apology without nouns. In the swirl, Sullivan kept one promise: no new funerals. He rotated cars at the safe house, moved Sarah every 48 hours, kept Mr. Alvarez's dog well-fed and well-loved. He told Pastor Cole to keep the candles lit and the side door unlocked. He told Claudia to sleep with the TV on, noise standing guard where locks couldn't. 2 days later, Evelyn finally cracked, not in public, not on camera. In a consultation room with glass too thick for eavesdropping, she leaned forward and spoke without theater. "You think this ends with me?" she said to Monroe and Sullivan. "It doesn't. Riverton is a franchise. You shut this one, they open another. They will use my name like a disinfectant." She smiled with no warmth. "Do you know what survives scandal? Structures." Sullivan didn't argue. He just said, "Structures can be condemned." She laughed. "Then bring a bulldozer." The bulldozer arrived in pieces. Subpoenas with sharper edges, a federal indictment with counts that read like a table of contents, a second confession from James that named the deputy with the state admin key. The deputy resigned to spend time with family. The attorney general called it disappointing. The governor called it unacceptable, and then asked for campaign donations from someone else. At sunset, Sullivan returned to the bridge. Lena joined him, hands in her coat, breath fogging the air. "Feels like an ending," she said. "It's a turn," he answered. Endings don't have sirens. She looked at the river, at the town beyond it, at the steeple with the tired bell. "What do we do now?" "We write the part that doesn't fit on a warrant," he said. "We tell it right." "Dark Pulse style?" she teased, a tired smile finally showing. "Crime thriller, murder mystery, true crime honesty," he said. "No ghosts, just people." He flicked his cigarette into the water and watched the ember go dark. On his phone, a final text arrived from an unknown number. "You unmasked the killers. Don't forget the victims." He saved it as a contact, deep archivist. The file name under it read, "Emily, last addendum." He opened it there on the bridge, a single scanned page in Emily's hand. "If this reaches you, it means I lost. But losing to fear is different than losing to force. Don't give Riverton fear. Give it names. Give it light." Sullivan closed the screen and looked up at the town. "Names," he said, "and light. The dangerous game of deception and truth." The Whitmores in jail, the Hartmans in disgrace, and a contract killer finally in handcuffs. Riverton should have been breathing again. Instead, the town felt tighter, like someone had drawn the curtains and locked every door. The murder mystery wasn't finished, it was just changing shape. Detective Sullivan stood in the squad room late at night, smoke curling from his cigarette, staring at the board plastered with faces, evidence photos, strings like spider silk. Emily Hartman at the center, still watching him. Around her, the 9 dead, and now 2 women in custody. The story was dark enough to sell every front page in the state. But there was one problem. A single witness was still alive, a man who claimed he knew the last hidden thread. The witness was named Jonas Price, a former city accountant who had worked quietly in the background of Riverton's financial offices. He'd contacted Lena anonymously with the promise of proof that ties every payment to every murder. Lena convinced him to come in, trembling and pale, carrying a briefcase that looked older than his suit. Inside the case were receipts, emails, and routing slips. "These show the transfers," Jonas whispered. "From Hartman Construction into Evelyn Whitmore's foundation, and from there into Nolan's shell accounts. Margaret paid for silence. Evelyn paid for power. But there's more. Names outside Riverton. Names that would burn this town to the ground." Sullivan asked, "Why now?" Jonas's eyes darted. "Because I'm next. They know I handled the books, and they know I can prove who gave the final orders." They set a date for his full deposition, Thursday at noon before the federal grand jury. Sullivan felt for the first time like the end was in sight. But endings in Riverton never came quietly. That night, Jonas Price was found dead. His body lay slumped in his car outside the diner where he'd promised to meet Claudia for coffee. A single bullet hole through the window, a briefcase gone. Witnesses said they saw a figure in a hood cross the parking lot and vanish. No cameras, no fingerprints. Lena stood beside the car, her throat tight. He was the last one, the one who could have tied it all together. Sullivan's jaw tightened as he looked at the body. Now the game changes. They're not just silencing witnesses. They're rewriting the story before it's written. The death hit Riverton like a hammer. The news screamed, "Key witness in true crime case murdered." Conspiracy theorists spun wild theories online. Was Jonas killed by Evelyn's allies? By Margaret's loyalists? By some hidden mastermind who hadn't yet stepped into the light? Inside the squad room, Claudia slammed her fist against the desk. "That's it. They're one step ahead every time. Evidence, witnesses, even my lab work. Somehow they know exactly what to erase." "Then we stop giving them time," Sullivan said. He turned to Lena. "Who knew about Jonas's testimony?" "Only us, Monroe's office, and the DA," Lena answered. Sullivan lit another cigarette. "Then one of them is bleeding information." The room fell into silence. If someone inside the circle was playing both sides, the truth was in even greater danger. Meanwhile, Riverton itself began to fracture. Protesters gathered outside City Hall with signs reading "Justice for Emily" and "No more lies." Others shouted that the Whitmores were innocent, scapegoats for a failing system. Margaret's supporters called Sullivan a fraud, claiming Emily had fabricated everything. The town no longer trusted its own reflection. Late that night, Sullivan received a call from Sarah Hartman. Her voice shook through the static. "I think they're watching me again." A car outside, lights off. Just sitting there. Sullivan and Lena rushed to the safe house. By the time they arrived, the car was gone, only tire tracks left in the gravel. Inside, Sarah was trembling, clutching a journal of Emily's she hadn't turned over before. "She wrote this the week before she died," Sarah said, pressing the book into Sullivan's hands. "She said if anything happened to her, the truth would keep moving. She called it The Dangerous Game of Deception and Truth." The title, scrawled across the first page, sent a shiver down Sullivan's spine. Emily had known. She'd seen the deception, the masks, the danger waiting. In the journal, Emily described conversations she overheard, whispers between her mother and a contractor, Evelyn meeting with a state contact, her own sister Sarah warning her to stop. She noted strange deposits, hidden accounts, and, most disturbing of all, a single sentence. If they silence me, they'll silence the witnesses next. Lena whispered. She predicted Jonas. Sullivan nodded. And probably the next one. Emily's journal wasn't just evidence, it was prophecy. The next day, Agent Monroe convened an emergency meeting. He laid the journal on the table, flipping through the pages. This isn't just diary rambling. These are near contemporaneous notes that match our evidence trail. If we authenticate this, it ties Margaret and Evelyn directly to the pattern of murders. But it still doesn't give us the trigger pullers, Sullivan said. Nolan was one, but not the only one. Jonas's killer proves they've got another tool in play. Monroe rubbed his temples. Then we bait them. Leak that another witness has stepped up, someone holding the rest of Emily's files. If they move on that witness, we catch them in the act. Dangerous, Lena said. Exactly, Sullivan replied, but truth always is. And that night, Sullivan sat alone in his office, Emily's journal open in front of him. He read her final words again. Truth is dangerous, deception is deadly, don't confuse the two. He looked at the board, at the photos of the dead, at the faces of the living. Margaret, Evelyn, Nolan, Sarah, Claudia, himself, everyone caught in the same dangerous game. And as the clock ticked past midnight, Sullivan realized Emily hadn't just left clues. She had left a warning that in Riverton, truth wasn't salvation, it was bait. And someone was still hungry enough to kill for it. Of the morning after Jonas Price's murder, Riverton woke up choking on rumors. Coffee shops buzzed with the words cover-up, inside job, police betrayal. Newspapers splashed headlines like gasoline, witness murdered in cold blood, and unsolved murder mystery deepens. Detective Sullivan scanned the headlines with no satisfaction. He knew every headline meant Riverton's fragile trust slipping away. He lit a cigarette and stood by the station window. Lena walked in, hair still wet from the rain. Monroe wants you at the courthouse, she said. The DA's worried. He thinks this witness killing could blow the case. Sullivan exhaled smoke. Good, let it blow. Sometimes you need an explosion before people start looking at the rubble. At the courthouse, the DA was pacing like a man who'd bet on the wrong horse. We can't hold this together. The Hartmans, the Whitmores, Nolan, now Price, jurors will see chaos, not justice. It looks like true crime chaos, not a case. Sullivan dropped Emily's journal on the desk. Then we make it simple. 2 women at the center, Margaret Hartman and Evelyn Whitmore. One hired a killer for family betrayal. The other strangled her way through politics. Every corpse points back to them. Monroe added, and now we've got Jonas's murder to prove they're still pulling strings even behind bars. The DA rubbed his temples. You want me to spin a conspiracy into a trial? Sullivan leaned forward, his voice sharp. Not a conspiracy, a murder mystery, a thriller this town's been living in for months. And if we tell it right, names, dates, forensics, money, we don't need spin, we just need light. That night, Sarah Hartman couldn't sleep. She paced the safe house, clutching Emily's journal to her chest. Sullivan sat with her at the kitchen table, coffee steaming between them. She warned us all, Sarah whispered. She saw this coming, but she still wrote it down. Why? Why leave a map to her own murder? Because Emily knew the rules of this game, Sullivan said. She knew deception only works if no one names it. She left names. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She left me too. I told her to stop. I told her she'd ruin us. Sullivan's voice softened. You didn't kill her, Sarah. Margaret did. But Sarah shook her head. We all did. Every one of us who stayed silent. 2 days later, Claudia rushed into the station, breathless, holding a printout. Intercepted email from Nolan's account. Someone contacted him last month under the alias East Fence. The message reads, "Price must go. Others can follow." Lena's eyes widened. So Jonas's killer wasn't a random hit, it was ordered just like Emily's. And Nolan wasn't the only contractor, Claudia added. He passed it off, which means someone else is still out there, active. Sullivan ground his cigarette into the tray. Another blade, another ghost in Riverton streets. That evening, Sullivan and Lena met Monroe at a diner outside town. Rain hammered the windows. The waitress filled their cups without asking. Monroe pulled a file from his coat. "We've traced the East Fence alias to a burner phone. It pinged near the Hartman estate and City Hall multiple times. Same device was at the diner the night Price was shot." "Inside job," Sullivan muttered. "Inside Riverton at least," Monroe said. "Maybe inside law enforcement. The DA's office doesn't like that theory." "Of course not," Sullivan said. "The DA's office bleeds every time the truth cuts too deep." That night, Sullivan walked the cemetery where Emily was buried. Fog crawled low between the stones. He stood at her grave reading her journal by flashlight. On one page, Emily had scrawled, "Truth and deception walk side by side. If you can't tell the difference, you'll follow the wrong one into the dark." Sullivan whispered into the night, "I'm trying, Emily, but your town wears too many masks." He flicked his cigarette into the wet grass. A figure moved in the fog. Sullivan's hand went to his gun, but it was Pastor Cole, lantern in hand. "You look for answers here," the pastor said. "Emily left them here," Sullivan replied. The pastor nodded slowly. "Then remember, answers don't heal. They only demand more questions." The next morning, Sullivan got his next question. A package arrived at the station, no return address. Inside was Jonas Price's missing briefcase. It was empty except for one scrap of paper written in block letters. "Truth is dead. Deception lives." Lena stared at it. "They're taunting us. They want us chasing shadows." "Good," Sullivan said, "because shadows always lead back to the fire that cast them." The town grew more dangerous by the day. Protests turned into riots outside the courthouse. Supporters of Evelyn and Margaret clashed with those who wanted them hanged. The words "unsolved murder mystery" and "true crime cover-up" became hashtags, drawing podcasters and amateur sleuths like moths. Sullivan knew Riverton was no longer just a case. It was a stage, and the killers still hiding wanted to write the final act themselves. So he made a choice. At a press conference, standing under the courthouse steps, Sullivan held up Emily's journal for the cameras. "This is the voice of Emily Hartman," he declared. "She wrote the truth while the rest of us lived in lies. She predicted her death. She predicted Price's. And she warned us that deception would keep killing until someone ended it. That day is coming, and to whoever's still hiding, I'll drag you into the light myself." The crowd roared. Reporters scribbled. Riverton gasped. But somewhere in the shadows, another killer watched, smiling. Because in the dangerous game of deception and truth, the closer Sullivan got, the more dangerous it became. The press conference lit Riverton on fire. By nightfall, Emily Hartman's journal was the talk of every diner booth, every gas station counter, every church circle. The words "true crime revelation" and "unsolved murder prophecy" hit the evening news crawl, fueling the storm. Sullivan hadn't just reopened wounds, he'd torn away the last bandage. At the station, Lena dropped a stack of clippings onto his desk. "They're calling you the truth detective. Half the town thinks you're the hero who exposed the masterminds. The other half thinks you're a fraud inventing ghosts to sell a story. Sullivan exhaled smoke into the ceiling fan. Good. Heroes and frauds both draw attention. Attention means fewer shadows to hide in. Claudia walked in, pale and tense. I got another intercept. The same East Fence alias sent a message yesterday. Stage 2 in play. Remove the detective. Lena froze. They've moved past witnesses. Sullivan stubbed his cigarette. Then we stop being targets. We start being bait. And that night, Sarah Hartman called. Her voice shook. Someone slipped a note under my door. It says, silence or join her. What do I do? Sullivan and Lena drove to the safe house. The note lay on the kitchen table, typed in block letters like Jonas's. Sarah sat trembling, clutching her sister's journal. They know you're still alive, Sullivan said. That makes you leverage. They'll keep pressing until you break. Tears streaked Sarah's cheeks. Emily was the brave one. I was always the coward. They'll finish me just to prove she was right. No, Sullivan said firmly. They want you scared, not brave. Fear makes better silence than death. But Lena caught his glance. Both knew Sarah's survival wasn't guaranteed. The next morning, Monroe gathered them in a secure office. We've identified another contractor working for East Fence, he said. Name's Calvin Dorsey, former military dishonorable discharge linked to private security firms. His phone pinged near the diner the night Price was killed. Sullivan studied the file. Nolan was the blade for Margaret. Dorsey's the blade for Evelyn. Same pattern, different hands. Then we bring him in, Monroe said. They never got the chance. That evening, Dorsey turned up dead in a motel 2 towns over. Shot twice in the chest, his burner phone smashed. Another loose end tied up before it could talk. Evelyn's still directing from her cell, Lena whispered. She's playing chess with corpses. Not chess, Sullivan muttered. Checkers. Quick moves, fast kills, clear the board. She doesn't plan to win. She plans to outlast. At the same time, Riverton boiled. A march filled Main Street with chants of justice for Emily and down with Whitmore. Counter-protesters shouted back. Police in riot gear lined the sidewalks. In the chaos, someone hurled a bottle. The glass shattered. The crowd surged. Sullivan and Lena waded through, trying to keep eyes on everything. But then Lena grabbed his arm. Look! Across the street, a man in a hood watched Sarah Hartman march with Pastor Cole's group. His hand dipped into his pocket. Sullivan sprinted, shoving through the crowd. By the time he reached the spot, the man was gone. Only a dropped matchbook remained, printed with the words, Garden Motel. In that night, Sullivan and Monroe raided the motel. Room 12 smelled of bleach and gasoline. On the bed sat a burned envelope, half charred but still legible. A list of initials, MHEWRHSH. And at the bottom, Detective S. Lena's blood ran cold. They've marked us all. Sullivan tucked the envelope into an evidence bag. Then we've got proof Evelyn's still pulling strings. Even locked up, she's playing the game. To the following morning, Claudia brought another bombshell. I checked the typewriter ribbons from the library machines, the same ones used for the Jonas note and Sarah's threat. They match fingerprints from Daniel Hartman. Daniel! Lena gasped. But he looked broken, like he barely functioned. Broken men can still type, Claudia said quietly. Maybe he wasn't a pawn. Maybe he was part of it. Sullivan clenched his jaw. If Daniel's involved, it means the Hartmans weren't just Margaret's crime. They were a family operation. That night, Sullivan visited the Hartman estate again. Daniel sat in the parlor, glassy-eyed, whiskey trembling in his hand. "You knew, didn't you?" Sullivan said. "About Emily, about Jonas, about all of it." Daniel's eyes flicked up. For once they were clear. "You think my mother carried all that weight alone?" "No. We all helped her. Richard signed the checks. Sarah kept quiet. And me?" He laughed bitterly. "I was the errand boy. Notes, calls, threats. I couldn't kill, but I could scare, and fear kills just as well." Sullivan's stomach turned. "So you threatened your own sister?" Daniel's smile was hollow. "Family is the sharpest blade, detective. Cuts cleaner than any contractor." The next morning, Sullivan called Monroe. "We can't separate this anymore. Margaret killed Emily, Evelyn killed Rachel, but the rest? They turned it into a family and power circus. Every hand in Riverton is dirty." "Then what's the end game?" Monroe asked. Sullivan lit a cigarette. "Expose them all. No masterminds, no scapegoats. Just a town that drowned itself in lies." That evening, Sullivan opened Emily's journal again. Near the end, she'd written, "If truth dies with me, let deception kill itself. They'll turn on each other before the end." He read the line 3 times, then looked at Lena. "Emily's not just warning us, she's telling us how it ends. Deception will eat itself. We just have to survive long enough to watch." Lena nodded slowly. "And keep Sarah alive long enough to testify." "Exactly," Sullivan said. "Because once she speaks, the game is over." But outside, Riverton wasn't listening to survival. It was listening to fire. Protest turned violent again. Bricks through windows, gasoline in bottles. The town wasn't waiting for court anymore. It was holding its own trial in the streets. And in the dangerous game of deception and truth, chaos was the perfect disguise. The march burned out by dawn, but smoke hung over Riverton like a warning that wouldn't fade. Sullivan slept an hour at his desk, woke to cold coffee, and decided the only way to survive a true crime conspiracy was to make the killers hurry. Rushed people make dumb choices. Dumb choices leave fingerprints. He called Monroe and Claudia and laid out bait. They'd leak that a new witness would deliver Emily's remaining files at a closed-door hearing tomorrow at noon. No names, just a rumor with teeth. Lena would carry a decoy briefcase. Sarah would be moved before sunrise to a place even the task force didn't know. Pastor Cole's basement office behind a locked sacristy door. Mr. Alvarez would sit 2 pews away with the nervous dog and a radio under a hymnal. By mid-morning, the rumor walked on its own. Talk radio ran with it. Blogs posted old photos of Lena and called them exclusive. The courthouse clerk texted Monroe a screenshot of a mass message from an unknown hub. "Deliver the files. Eastgate, noon." The signature was an underscore and a dot. Claudia pointed at the dot. "Like a tiny fence," she said. Sullivan staged the decoy in the tunnel connecting the annex to the records wing. Fluorescents hummed. The air smelled like paper and basement rain. 2 agents watched each end. A third sat on a mop bucket pretending to read sports. Lena practiced the walk, elbow in, chin down, fast enough to look afraid, slow enough to look official. At 10:53, a janitor keyed a service door that should have been deadbolted. His cart squeaked, stopped, reversed. The mop bucket agent lowered his paper. "Now," he whispered. "Now," Sullivan said. The janitor wasn't a janitor. He crossed with a gloved hand and a flat pistol and took Lena's bait. A dye pack blew in his sleeve, blue mist blooming into his collar. He fired once. The round buried itself in cinder block. Monroe's men took him down. On his phone, the last text read, "Collect East Fence." He wasn't Dorsey. He wasn't Nolan. He was a deputy court officer who'd worked the annex 8 years. "Side job," he said when the cuffs clicked. "I move envelopes. I don't open them." "Structures," Evelyn had said. The structure was hiring hallways. They moved Sarah before sunrise. Pastor Cole opened the side door with a key older than the town and guided her into a windowless room where the church kept extra candles. "Truth is a pilgrim," he said, trying to smile. "Sometimes it sleeps on the floor." Sarah nodded. Emily's journal clutched like bread. At 11:42, the tunnel lights flickered. Claudia called. Someone tried to remote into the evidence image server and rewrite the Rachel DNA checksum. Monroe killed the port. "State admin again," she said. "The hash failed. Your mirrors saved us." Noon came loud. A crowd filled the courthouse steps. Inside, the decoy hearing room waited. Lena walked the tunnel with the briefcase. At the east door, a man in a suit held it open a heartbeat too long. Sullivan caught the gesture and the cuff. State seal. Attorney General's office. He filed the face in the way the man didn't look back. The trap worked and didn't. They caught the runner, not the hand. But the runner's phone gave them a ladder, 3 numbers repeating across weeks. A prepaid in the Capitol, a landline at a firm, and a city cell registered to a task force liaison who swore he'd never met an underscore. Monroe's jaw flexed. "We'll take the Capitol," he said. "You keep the town breathing." Breathing got harder after dark. Someone tossed a bottle at Claudia's motel and missed the window by an inch. Glass fell. She texted a photo and one word. "Close." Sullivan moved her to an empty classroom at the school where the Wi-Fi barely worked and the ghosts were algebra. At 9:19, a video hit Sullivan's phone. Sarah asleep on a cot, Pastor Cole in a chair, the dog under the desk. The camera angle was wrong, too high for the door, too low for the ceiling. The message said, "Truth or silence." Midnight. He drove like guilt, radioed Lena to meet him at the church, and hit the sacristy door with his shoulder. Inside, the cot was neat, the chair empty, the dog awake, wagging. Pastor Cole stepped from the next room with a teapot. "You're early," he said. "We moved her an hour ago." He held up the church's monitor, its green digits blinking 22:06. The video had been recorded before the text. "Then who has eyes?" Sullivan asked. The priest pointed up. In the vent above the door, a button camera winked. The feed ran to a transmitter nested in a hymnal. Old sins hide in plain sight. They pulled the camera, bagged the hymnal, and followed the wire to a lot where a sedan waited with the engine off and the driver slumped. Not dead, drugged. In the back seat, a courier bag lay open around more button cams and a roll of church key stickers pre-cut to fit. The driver's phone was warm. His last text, "Package in place, EF." Lena's voice was a whisper that hurt. "They were watching everywhere we felt safe." He nodded. "So we stopped feeling safe." They moved Sarah again, 3rd shelter in a day. This time to Ms. Cortez's little apartment over the library, the shelves below full of the stubborn paper Emily loved. Ms. Cortez made soup and stacked quilts and said nothing that turned into rumor. The dog slept like he'd invented it. For an hour, the town exhaled. At 11:58, Sullivan's phone buzzed from an unlisted number. He answered and heard glass break on the other end. A woman's breath. Then Claudia's voice. Small and iron. "They found me." The line went dead. The school's alarm stayed silent. Someone had cut it or bribed it or taught it to sleep. Sullivan ran. The night ran with him. Race against time to stop the next murder. So the call from Claudia cut through Sullivan like a blade. He and Lena sped toward the abandoned school, tires shrieking across wet pavement, siren off to avoid warning whoever had already broken in. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows black eyes watching their approach. Inside, the halls smelled of dust, mold, and silence. Sullivan's flashlight beam swept across broken lockers and graffiti. "Claudia!" he shouted, voice echoing off cinderblock walls. No answer. They moved quickly, boots crunching glass, every shadow threatening to move. A faint buzzing came from the old chemistry wing. Lena pushed the door open, gun raised. On the floor lay Claudia, wrists zip-tied, a bruise blooming across her cheek. She was breathing, barely. Her eyes fluttered open as Sullivan knelt beside her. They wanted the files, she whispered. Said I was next if I didn't erase everything. I stalled them. "Where are they now?" Sullivan demanded. Claudia coughed, blood flecking her lips. "Gone. But they left a countdown." Lena's gaze snapped to the blackboard. Scrawled in chalk were 3 words, "Next one midnight." The clock on the wall read 11:16. Sullivan pulled Claudia to her feet, supporting her weight. "You're safe now, but we've got 40 minutes before they kill again." "Who?" Lena asked, her voice tight. "They didn't say," Claudia whispered. "Just someone close." Back at the station, Sullivan pinned the words "Next one midnight" to the evidence board. Everyone stared in silence. Sarah sat trembling in the corner, clutching Emily's journal. "It's me," she whispered. "They're coming for me." Sullivan shook his head. "Maybe. But maybe that's what they want you to think, deception and truth. They've been playing us from the start." Monroe slammed his fist on the table. "We don't have time for riddles. We need locations. Who's vulnerable right now?" Claudia winced as she pulled a flash drive from her pocket. "I saved this before they hit me. It's server access logs. The alias East Fence logged in 30 minutes ago from St. Jude's Church." Everyone froze. Pastor Cole. Sullivan and Lena rushed to the church, headlights off. The old stone building stood silent under the moonlight. Inside, candles still burned in the nave. Pastor Cole was on the floor, bound like Claudia, a Bible stuffed into his mouth to muffle screams. Lena tore the gag out. "Where are they?" the pastor gasped. "Basement. They came for Sarah." Sullivan's stomach dropped. They sprinted to the basement, guns drawn. The door stood open, hinges broken. Inside, the room was empty. Cot overturned, quilts scattered, the dog whining in the corner. Sarah was gone. On the wall, spray painted in red. "She speaks. She dies." By the time backup arrived, Sullivan was already gone, chasing tire tracks down the back road that wound into the woods. Lena rode shotgun, scanning the dark. "They planned this," she said. "The notes, the cameras, the bait. It was all to get to Sarah. She's the one piece that can ruin both Evelyn and Margaret." Sullivan's jaw clenched around his cigarette. "Then we don't let her become their finale." The tracks led to the old quarry outside town, a place long abandoned after 2 workers drowned in a collapse years ago. Sullivan killed the headlights and coasted the last 100 yards. At the lip of the quarry, a single floodlight blazed. Sarah stood at the edge, hands tied, a hooded figure gripping her shoulder. Another man stood nearby, pistol in hand. "Stay back," the gunman shouted into the night. "One more step and she's gone." Sullivan and Lena crouched behind a rusted truck. "2 of them," Lena whispered. "No," Sullivan muttered. 3. His eyes locked on a 3rd figure emerging from the shadows. Pearls glinted under the floodlight. Margaret Hartman. Margaret's voice carried across the quarry. "Sarah was always weak, always ready to betray us. Emily's voice died, but Sarah still has hers. I won't let her destroy everything." Sarah sobbed. "Mother, please, I never wanted this." You chose Emily over us, Margaret hissed. You always did. Sullivan stepped into the light, gun raised. Drop her, Margaret. You've already confessed to one daughter's murder. You don't want two. Margaret's laugh was brittle. Confessions mean nothing, detective. Stories can be rewritten, but silence is eternal. She raised her hand. The gunman shoved Sarah closer to the edge. Her heels slipped on the gravel. Sullivan fired. The gunman dropped, screaming as the bullet tore through his leg. Lena rushed forward, tackling the second figure before he could react. Sarah collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Gravel cutting her skin. Margaret froze, pearls trembling against her throat. For the first time, Sullivan saw fear in her eyes. Monroe's team arrived minutes later, cuffing the gunman and dragging Margaret away. She screamed curses at Sarah, at Sullivan, at the town itself. You'll regret this. Riverton will rot without us. Sullivan ignored her. He pulled Sarah into his arms, steadying her trembling frame. You're safe now, he whispered. But Sarah shook her head, eyes wide with terror. No, don't you see? Margaret was only one hand. Evelyn's still playing. And she'll kill again. The words chilled Sullivan to the bone, because she was right. The night wasn't over, and the clock was still ticking. The quarry rescue should have felt like victory. Margaret in cuffs, Sarah alive, hired guns down. But Sullivan felt no relief as the floodlights faded and the echoes died. Margaret's last words, "Riverton will rot without us," clung to the night air. By dawn, the town was buzzing again. News anchors replayed shaky cell phone footage of Sarah's near death at the quarry. Hashtags like Quarry Confession and True Crime Riverton trended. Some called Sullivan a hero. Others accused him of staging the whole thing to boost his case. At the station, Lena threw the paper on Sullivan's desk. The headline screamed, "Another murder mystery twist, detective saves witness at last second." "They've turned this into entertainment," she muttered. "A crime thriller the whole country's watching." But behind the headlines, Evelyn's still pulling strings. Sullivan lit his cigarette. "Then we stop entertaining, we end it." Claudia sat pale in the corner, a bandage across her cheek. She pulled out her laptop. "Before they grabbed me, I cracked Nolan's old drives. There's a ledger entry marked midnight delivery. Not Margaret, not Evelyn. Another set of initials, J.W. Lena's eyes widened. "James Whitmore?" "Exactly," Claudia said. "We thought he was just Evelyn's shadow. Turns out he was paying contractors directly." Sullivan ground his cigarette into the ashtray. "So while Evelyn strangled and Margaret plotted, James bought the bullets. We've been staring at the wife and mother, but the husband was just as dirty." And they didn't have time to process before Monroe stormed in. "We've got chatter. Another hit is scheduled tonight. No names, just coordinates. Riverton Memorial Hospital." Lena's face drained. "That's where they moved the Hartmans after the quarry. Richard collapsed after Margaret's arrest. He's in ICU." "Then the target's clear," Sullivan said. "They want to silence the last Hartman who knows the books." By nightfall, the hospital was crawling with agents. Sullivan and Lena took shifts watching Richard's room. Machines beeped steadily as Richard lay pale under fluorescent lights. Sarah sat in the corner, holding his hand despite her fear. "Why protect him?" Sullivan asked. "Because he's still my father," Sarah whispered. "And because Emily would have wanted me too." At 11:47, Lena spotted movement in the stairwell camera. A figure in scrubs, face hidden behind a surgical mask, pushing a cart. They moved too quickly, avoiding nurses heading straight for ICU. Sullivan and Monroe intercepted at the corridor. The figure dropped the cart and pulled a pistol from under the linens. Shots cracked through the sterile hall. Sullivan dove, returning fire. The figure collapsed, mask torn away. It wasn't a stranger. It was Daniel Hartman. Sarah screamed as her brother bled out on the tile, eyes wide with pain and fury. "You don't understand," Daniel gasped. "Emily wanted to burn us all. Mother was right. Evelyn promised we'd survive if I helped." His voice broke into a cough. It was survival, family survival. Then he was gone. Sarah sobbed into her hands. Sullivan stared at the body, rage burning. Another Hartman lost to the same disease, lies, and fear. But Lena's eyes were on the bigger picture. If Evelyn convinced Daniel to pull the trigger even from her cell, then she still controls more than we thought. Later that night, Sullivan sat alone in the hospital parking lot. The rain fell steady on his windshield. He opened Emily's journal again, flipping to the final pages. One sentence stood out, underlined twice. "They'll turn on each other before the end." He whispered, "You were right again, Emily. Margaret, Richard, Daniel, all eaten by their own secrets." But Emily's ghost wasn't finished. In the margin, she had scrawled, "The last mask is the hardest to pull off. It smiles even as it kills." Sullivan snapped the journal shut. The last mask wasn't Margaret or Daniel, it was Evelyn. The next morning, Evelyn appeared in court, calm despite shackles, her lawyers carrying boxes of motions. She spoke briefly to reporters. "These tragedies prove my innocence. My family has been destroyed by false accusations. I will clear my name." Sullivan watched from the crowd. He saw the faintest curl of her lips as she passed him. The smile of someone who believed she was still winning. But that night, Monroe laid it out bluntly. "We've got less than 24 hours before the next scheduled move. The chatter calls it the finale. If we don't stop it, there'll be another body, and this time it might be Sarah, Claudia, or even you." "Then we don't wait for the finale," Sullivan said. "We write it ourselves." They built the plan. Claudia would mirror every drive to federal servers out of state. Sarah would testify by video link from a secure bunker. Sullivan and Lena would stage another decoy, this time not with files but with Sarah herself. A public appearance, bait to draw Evelyn's last loyalists into the open. The risk was enormous, but time was up. The killers weren't slowing. They were accelerating. At 11:30 the following night, the courthouse square was lit with spotlights and cameras. A podium stood under the steps. Sullivan walked out, cigarette glowing, Lena at his side. Behind them, a figure with Sarah's silhouette stepped into view. Hood pulled low. The crowd gasped. Reporters surged forward. For a heartbeat, Riverton believed Sarah was about to speak. That heartbeat was enough. A shot cracked from the rooftop. The hooded figure dropped. Chaos erupted. Sullivan and Lena returned fire instantly, agents flooding the square. The shooter was pinned against the rooftop chimney. When they dragged him down, his mask fell away. It was James Whitmore. The town froze as the news hit. Evelyn's husband, the mayor, had pulled the trigger himself. Lena whispered, "She turned even him into a weapon." Sullivan lit his last cigarette, staring at James as he was cuffed. "No," he said. "She didn't turn him. He chose. They all chose. That's the truth Emily wanted us to see." The dangerous game wasn't just about deception. It was about how much truth people were willing to kill to protect. And Riverton had almost killed itself to find out. Riverton didn't sleep after the courthouse decoy. The moment James Whitmore's face hit the evening news as the rooftop shooter, phones lit up across the county. Some people celebrated like the end credits had finally rolled on a crime thriller. Others whispered that the unsolved murder mystery had just crowned a new villain while the real puppeteer kept tugging strings. Evelyn's lawyers did live interviews from curbside, painting James as a man broken by grief, a true crime tragedy, not a predator. The narrative war raged while the cells stayed locked. Sullivan didn't celebrate. He sat in the empty squad room with a paper cup of burnt coffee and Emily's journal open to the underlined line. The last mask smiles even as it kills. Lena dropped into the chair across from him, rain in her hair, adrenaline still refusing to sit down. "We caught the shooter," she said. "So why does it feel like we missed the shot?" "Because the chatter said there was a finale," Sullivan answered. "James was an act break." Claudia hobbled in with a fresh bandage, laptop tucked under her arm. "I mirrored the hospital footage," she said. "James parked 2 blocks away and changed on the back stairs. No handler on camera. But East Fence pinged 5 minutes before the shot." She slid a printout across the desk. The text read, "Stage the ending. Midnight fires. Timestamp 11:24 p.m. "Midnight fires?" Lena repeated. "Plural?" Sullivan felt the answer before he had words for it. "The library," he said. "Emily's notebooks. Ms. Cortez, Sarah." He was already standing. They arrived to the smell of something wrong, sweet and metallic under the usual paper dust of old stacks. Ms. Cortez met them on the stairs, palms slick, whispering that the boiler had started making a sound like a throat clearing. Sullivan knelt at the basement door and listened. Not a boiler. A hiss. Lena traced the line with a flashlight and found a knife nick in the gas pipe, plastic sheeting taped to funnel the leak toward the stairwell like a wick in a lantern. Someone had duct-taped a cheap timer to a clunky igniter and tucked it behind the return vent. "Race against time," Lena muttered, hands already moving. "I hate how literal they are." Claudia cut the main, fingers shaking, while Ms. Cortez dialed Monroe with the quiet competence of a person who had waited her whole life to be brave. Sullivan scanned the stacks. In the travel aisle, a shadow shifted, then froze. He stepped in, gun low. The man in the crisp suit from the courthouse east door turned his face just enough for recognition. No mask, no apology. "You don't belong to Riverton," Sullivan said. "I belong to Outcomes," the man replied. "State admin isn't a person, it's a tool like your gun." "Like hired killers," Sullivan said. The man palmed something behind a book about scenic highways. Sullivan heard the click and moved, catching a flash of metal before it could spark. The man ran, clipping the end cap. Paper rained. Lena was on the far side already, driving him back with nothing but presence and a promise in her eyes that he wouldn't leave with his secrets. He chose the window instead, shoulder first through glass, landing in the hedges with a sound like a broken oath. Monroe's agents took him in the alley, wrists sealed in a moment. His phone vibrated once in a gloved hand. EF. "Delay?" "Delay," Sullivan said, reading aloud. "Not defeat." Upstairs, Sarah emerged from Ms. Cortez's apartment with the dog at her heels and a face that had run out of tears. "I heard the hiss," she said, voice small. "I thought it was the kettle." "It was a match," Sullivan answered. "You didn't light it." They packed the timer, the knife, the taped plastic, the phone. Claudia snapped photos of the nicked pipe, then photographed her own watch for a clean time record. She whispered almost to herself, "Forensic evidence survives if you make it boring enough to ignore." Sullivan nodded, grateful for the scientist who had learned to outstare liars. Monroe called from the alley. "Your suit has a badge in his wallet. Deputy counsel to the AG. We'll translate tool into counts." He paused. "And his encrypted chat mirrors to a hub in the Capitol." East Fence isn't a person, it's a clearinghouse. Structures, Sullivan said, hearing Evelyn's contemptuous lesson again. Then we keep pulling beams until the roof can't pretend to float. They didn't try to sleep. Ms. Cortez brewed coffee like a liturgy while Sarah curled on the couch with the dog and Emily's journal, lips moving as she read her sister's handwriting aloud in a whisper. Lena stood at the window watching rain draw soft lines through the streetlights. They wanted to burn truth and witness in one spark, she said. High CTR, high drama, easy headline. Library fire destroys evidence in murder mystery. Small-town corruption loves symbolism, Sullivan said. We'll give them paperwork instead. By 3 a.m., Claudia had packaged a full chain of custody bundle. Photos, timestamps, device IDs, the deputy's badge, the timer and blade, sealed into twin envelopes, one for Monroe's task force, one for a judge who kept his promises. She added a thumb drive labeled Riverton, Dark Secrets, and smiled despite the bruise. If they try to argue contamination, I'll argue boring. Juries believe boring. At 4, the deputy counsel's phone dumped its cache into Monroe's laptop. Chats unscrolled like a script. EF, to hub, deliver. Hub, to runner, collect. No names, only roles and verbs. It was enough to draw lines past Riverton, to firms and offices that had snickered from a safe distance while the town bled. True crime stopped being entertainment when the invoices surfaced. Dawn came mean and gray. The town looked smaller in that light, like fear had shrunk the buildings. News tickers still crawled with shocking twist and final showdown, but in the library's back room the mood wasn't cinematic. It was stubborn. Sarah recorded a sworn video statement with Ms. Cortez's desk lamp for lighting and a blanket thumbtacked behind her for a clean background. She read names and dates from Emily's journal, voice shaking but steadying at the end. My sister believed truth could be louder than money, she said. I'm done whispering. Sullivan uploaded the file to Monroe's secure drop and 3 mirrored lockers. He added a scheduled release, noon. If we don't make it there, he told Lena, it goes live without us. You love a deadline, she said, smiling with exactly one corner of her mouth. He left the library in the early sun and walked the block to St. Jude's. Pastor Cole met him on the steps with 2 coffees and an apology for letting the camera hide in a hymnal. We bless objects all the time, the pastor said. We forget they don't bless us back. Bless stubbornness, Sullivan said. Bless the side door. They sat a minute, not praying, not praying. Then Sullivan's phone buzzed, a text with no number, only a single character and a time. 11:59, and a pin drop on the courthouse square. They're going to try again, he said. Public, Lena answered. Always public. Because they don't need to win, he said. They just need to make truth look messy. He called Monroe, stacked cars around the square, put plainclothes in the crowd, and a medic by the statue where people like to faint. At 11:55, the deputy counsel in cuffs pointed with his chin from the back of a van. Clock tower, he said, not the roof, the face. They found the hatch ajar, the narrow ladder slick with rain. On the platform, a backpack sat against the bell like a pilgrim's offering. Inside, fireworks, not explosives, loud, bright, distracting, the sort of thing that could turn a statement into a stampede. Midnight fires at noon, Lena said. They adjusted for ratings. They cut the fuses, hauled the pack down, and let the bell ring on the hour like any other day. At 12's gone exactly. Sarah's video published to 3 places at once. The crowd's phones lit in a wave. On every screen, Emily's journal had a voice again. The pushback came fast. Statements, denials, a trending thread about fabricated diaries. but the comments below told a different story. Dates matching public permits, donation entries cross-checked by strangers with spreadsheets and free time, locals naming the way fear had shaped their errands for a year. The algorithm did something useful for once, lifting victims over villains. Sullivan stood on the courthouse steps without a microphone and watched a town recalibrate. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a pivot. Unsolved had lost its glamour. Forensic evidence and paper trail sounded like plot now, not paperwork. Dark secrets were daylighted in comment sections and church basements, and the murder mystery had fewer places to hide. His phone buzzed one more time. Delay accepted. Adapt. The underscore blinked, then vanished. He pocketed the device and looked at Lena. They'll try somewhere else. They always do, she said. We'll be there first. He didn't light a cigarette. For once he just breathed. Across town, Ms. Cortez shelved a returned book with hands that trembled and then steadied. In the library upstairs, Sarah closed Emily's journal and rested her palm on the cover like a vow. And in a federal evidence bin, a deputy's phone slept under a chain of custody seal, waiting to introduce East Fence to a jury that preferred boring truth to burning lies. By the time Sarah's testimony rippled through Riverton's feeds, the town was split down the middle. One side lit candles at St. Jude's and called her a survivor. The other side shouted in bars that she was a traitor, a puppet for Sullivan's agenda. But for the first time, Evelyn's smile in the courthouse looked brittle. She wasn't playing offense anymore. She was defending ground that crumbled with every upload. Sullivan didn't waste the momentum. He and Lena drove out to the federal annex where Monroe's task force had set up shop. The conference room was wallpapered in evidence photos, ledgers, screenshots of encrypted chats. Claudia limped in with another box of mirrored drives and dropped it on the table. Everything I salvaged from Nolan and Dorsey. Payment chains, contractor rosters, burner schedules. It's boring, but boring wins. Monroe pointed at the chart. East Fence is bigger than Riverton. It's a marketplace. Pay to erase, pay to intimidate, pay to kill. The Whitmores and the Hartmans were just clients. Structures, Sullivan muttered. Evelyn was right about that much. Lena leaned forward. If East Fence is a marketplace, then who runs the stall? Who cashes the payments? Monroe tapped a redacted line. We think it's funneled through a shell foundation in the capital. The name that keeps popping up? Victor Ramirez, dead supposedly. Claudia shook her head. No. His accounts were active last week. Sullivan lit a cigarette. So the man we buried may still be pulling strings. That night, Sullivan walked Sarah back to Ms. Cortez's apartment. She was quiet, clutching Emily's journal. Do you ever feel like we're not winning? She asked. Like every time we get a piece of truth, it just turns into another deception? Sullivan looked at her, tired eyes softened. That's the game, Sarah, but you're still here. That means we're still in it. She nodded, tears welling. Emily used to say truth is a race. You don't stop running just because the finish line moves. The finish line moved again the next morning. Monroe stormed into the station holding a printed transcript. Intercepted chat from East Fence Hub. It reads, "Stage the finale in court. Silence all testimony." They're coming for Sarah, Lena whispered. No, Monroe said grimly. They're coming for everyone. Jury, DA, witnesses, a massacre dressed as a mistrial. The weight of it settled like stone. Sullivan ground his cigarette into the tray. Then we stop waiting for the finale. We stage our own. And the plan was brutal in its simplicity. Sarah would testify live in court, not hidden away. Sullivan and Lena would flank her. Claudia would monitor feeds from a van outside, flagging any interference. Monroe's team would sweep the courthouse roof to basement. And in the gallery, undercover agents would sit like parishioners waiting for the bell. The risk was enormous, but the alternative was worse, letting deception write the last chapter. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation that morning. True crime bloggers sat shoulder to shoulder with state reporters. Locals filled the gallery, some praying, some glaring. Evelyn Whitmore sat at the defense table, pearls gone but poise intact, lawyers whispering into her ear. Margaret had been moved to a separate holding cell, her health failing, her confessions echoing through the docket like rattling chains. Sarah walked to the stand, knees trembling. Sullivan stood close enough to see her breath quicken. Lena squeezed her hand before she swore in. "My name is Sarah Hartman," she began, voice shaking. "My sister Emily wrote everything down. She wrote because she knew our family's secrets would kill her if she didn't. She was right. She told the jury about Margaret's payments, Daniel's threats, Richard's silence, about Evelyn's visit after Emily's funeral, her promise that truth is dangerous." Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. "Emily begged us to stop hiding, and I didn't listen. That silence nearly killed me too." Suddenly, Claudia's voice crackled in Sullivan's earpiece. "Movement, roof access, 2 figures armed." Sullivan's pulse spiked. "Positions!" he barked into the mic. Monroe's team surged. Shots rang out above the courtroom. The gallery screamed. Sullivan pulled Sarah down behind the stand as Lena drew her weapon. Evelyn sat calmly, watching chaos erupt, a faint smile on her lips. The roof fight was quick but brutal. One gunman went down, the other cuffed. Claudia confirmed through her feed. Both were ex-contractors tied to East Fence. Their orders were clear: kill Sarah before her testimony reached the public record. But Sarah had already spoken. The jury had heard. The record was live. When order returned, the judge refused Evelyn's lawyer's plea for mistrial. "The testimony stands," he declared. "The jury will consider it." Evelyn's mask cracked. For the first time, her hands shook as she adjusted her suit. She glanced toward Sullivan, eyes like daggers. "You think this ends me?" she hissed under her breath. Sullivan leaned close enough for only her to hear. "It ends your shadow. That's enough." Outside, Riverton exploded with noise. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust like weapons. Headlines screamed, "Murder mystery testimony survives assassination attempt." Hashtags like "non-shocking confession" and "dark secrets exposed" trended nationwide. Sullivan stood on the courthouse steps, cigarette lit, Lena and Sarah beside him. For once, he didn't have to say anything. The town had heard enough, but in his pocket his phone buzzed. A message with no sender. "East Fence still open. The game isn't over." He exhaled smoke into the autumn air. "One finale at a time," he muttered. Because in Riverton, truth was never the last chapter. It was just the next race, the final confession that exposed the mastermind. The courthouse should have been calm after Sarah's testimony survived the assassination attempt. Instead, Riverton felt like a town standing on a fault line. News vans choked Main Street, broadcasting shocking confession in murder mystery trial, while locals muttered that nothing ever changed. The words "final revelation" and "crime thriller climax" were everywhere, but Sullivan knew the story wasn't finished. Emily's prophecy haunted him. The last mask smiles even as it kills. Evelyn was cornered, yes, but not finished. Margaret was in failing health. Daniel was dead. Richard lay in ICU. James was awaiting arraignment. Still, the game felt incomplete, as if someone else had been pulling strings from beyond Riverton's borders. Sullivan leaned over the evidence board, cigarette dangling from his lips. "If East Fence is a marketplace," he said to Lena, "then Riverton was just a stall. The real mastermind isn't in jail. Not yet." Claudia shuffled in, laptop glowing with another decrypted file. "I traced payments from Victor Ramirez's accounts. Remember how he was declared dead?" She paused, eyes wide. "He isn't. He's alive, living under a new identity in Chicago, and he's been funding every East Fence operation for months." "Ramirez," Sullivan muttered. "The man everyone thought Evelyn silenced. Turns out he's the one writing checks for the silence." Lena exhaled. Then Evelyn wasn't the top of the pyramid. She was another pawn. 2 hours later, Monroe confirmed Claudia's lead. "We've got credible intel. Ramirez is meeting with an associate tonight at the old Riverton train depot. No cameras, no crowds. If we're going to catch him, this is our chance." Sullivan nodded. "Then we make it count." The depot was a ruin. Graffiti on the bricks, weeds splitting the platform, the smell of rust and rain. Sullivan and Lena crouched behind a shattered ticket booth while Monroe's agents flanked the exits. At 11:07 p.m., headlights swept the lot. A black sedan rolled up, stopping under the old clock. A man stepped out, tall, tailored, face older but unmistakable. Victor Ramirez. He wasn't alone. Another man slid from the passenger seat. To Sullivan's shock, it was the deputy counsel they'd already arrested, freed somehow from federal custody. Ramirez shook his hand like they were business partners. Sullivan whispered, "That's it. Proof East Fence isn't a ghost, it's Ramirez." They stepped out, guns raised. "Victor Ramirez, federal warrant!" Monroe shouted. For a moment, Ramirez froze. Then he laughed. "You think Riverton matters? Riverton was a trial run. The real market is everywhere." Lena's voice was steady. "Then you just confessed." But Ramirez didn't run. Instead, he pulled a recorder from his coat and tossed it on the ground. "Take it," he said calmly. "My insurance, all the calls, all the payments, all the clients. You'll burn half the state before you burn me." Sullivan picked it up, heart racing. The recorder contained hundreds of files. Claudia confirmed it instantly. Unbroken audio logs of conversations between Ramirez, Evelyn, Margaret, and even state officials. Names, dates, payments. It was the blueprint of every cover-up. "You just handed us your confession," Sullivan said. "No," Ramirez replied, smiling thin. "I handed you your death warrant. Try exposing this and the state will eat you alive." Before Sullivan could answer, the deputy counsel pulled a gun. But Monroe's men were faster. 2 shots rang out. The man collapsed. Ramirez lifted his hands, still calm. "Looks like I'll live to see trial." The arrest of Ramirez detonated like dynamite. National news plastered his face across every channel. Headlines screamed, "Victor Ramirez alive, mastermind of murder-for-hire ring, and small-town murder mystery exposes statewide conspiracy." In Riverton, people lined the courthouse steps to glimpse the man they'd thought buried. Some spit at his passing motorcade. Others bowed their heads, as though mourning a truth too heavy to carry. Evelyn, when told Ramirez had confessed, broke for the first time. In her cell, she screamed until her voice cracked, cursing his name. Margaret collapsed the same day, clutching pearls as paramedics wheeled her out. For Sullivan, the real weight came when he played the recordings. He heard Evelyn's cold voice ordering Rachel Carter's silence. He heard Margaret arranging Emily's meeting with Nolan. He heard James coordinating with contractors, and finally he heard Ramirez laughing as he wired payments. Deception is profitable, truth is not. Lena sat beside him, pale. This is it. The final confession. Proof Evelyn and Margaret were just shadows of a bigger mastermind. Sarah, clutching Emily's journal, whispered. Then Emily was right again. Truth and deception walk side by side. Ramirez was the last mask. But Sullivan knew it wasn't over. The recordings named more than Riverton's guilty. They named judges, lawyers, businessmen, people far beyond the town's borders. If released, the files would scorch the state. If hidden, Riverton would remain a pawn. He lit another cigarette, the flame illuminating his tired eyes. The mastermind's confession is on tape. Now the question is, do we play it safe, or do we burn the whole rotten structure down? Lena looked at him steady. Emily didn't write her journal for safety, she wrote it for truth. Sullivan exhaled smoke. Then we light the match. The race against time wasn't over. Ramirez's files were evidence, but also a target. Sullivan knew the closer they got to exposing the full conspiracy, the more dangerous the game became. Riverton's murders had started with Emily, but the final revelation would decide if truth itself survived, and as the recorder clicked in his hand, Sullivan felt Emily's ghost whisper the last line she'd written. Don't give Riverton fear, give it names, give it light. The final confession had exposed the mastermind. Now it was time to see if Riverton could survive the truth. The morning after Ramirez's arrest, Riverton woke to a new kind of fear. The kind that comes when a true crime conspiracy stops being rumor and becomes record. Talk radio called it a final confession. Cable banners screamed mastermind unmasked. The Attorney General's office filed 3 emergency motions before breakfast. Suppress the recorder, seal the names, gag the witnesses. Small-town corruption had called for a timeout. Sullivan didn't give it one. He sat with Lena and Claudia in a windowless conference room while Agent Monroe spread PDFs like playing cards. If the state wins a gag, Monroe said, when we lose daylight, we need a federal protective order for disclosure. Chain of custody hashes everything dull and undeniable. Boring truth beats burning lies, Claudia murmured, setting a portable drive on the table. These are bit-for-bit clones of the recorder, SHA 256 hashes on page 1. If they argue edits, the math argues back. Sullivan flipped through the log summary. The files weren't just incriminating, they were connective tissue. Evelyn's clipped orders about Rachel. Margaret's cold text. East Fence, Thursday. A call where James arranged a quiet fix after the gala blackout. And then Ramirez's voice, smooth as a checkbook. Deception is profitable, truth is not. It was a murder mystery without metaphor. By noon, the state judge signed a narrow gag that forbade public dissemination pending review. 10 minutes later, Monroe secured a broader federal order compelling preservation and permitting disclosure to a grand jury and press partners under protective protocol. The 2 orders stared at each other like rival sheriffs. Translation, Lena said. We don't leak. We publish with process. Sullivan nodded. We'll make the truth look like paperwork. Claudia slid one more folder across the table. And this makes Ramirez's old death official fraud. Inside, a pathologist's signature block copy-pasted across 2 autopsies, timestamps rewritten with the same state admin credential they'd already traced. Dental x-rays didn't match. Toe tag numbers jumped. The cadaver labeled as Ramirez had been a John Doe from 3 counties over. Philip Garner's suicide looked less like despair now and more like a cleanup, ordered according to one Ramirez call because the lab man went soft. Lena swallowed. So Garner died for growing a conscience. Chief Hal, too, Sullivan said quietly, scanning a late-night recording. Ramirez telling a deputy liaison that The sheriff with a spine needs sleep. The next week, Hal was shot by the graves. Forensic evidence and taped orders finally sat at the same table. Ramirez asked to see Sullivan. He got him, through glass, shackled, still immaculate. "You'll wreck a lot of careers if you release those calls," Ramirez said, amused. "You'll be famous. You'll also be unemployed. That's the economy of dark secrets." Sullivan lit an unlit cigarette and rolled it between his fingers. "You faked your death with a stolen cadaver and a bought lab. You hired blades to strangle, drown, and shoot neighbors. Economy is not your word anymore." Ramirez smiled thin. "Detective, I didn't strangle anyone. I offered services. People purchased outcomes. That's all a marketplace is. If you close the stall in Riverton, 10 more open with better lighting." "Then we take the roof," Sullivan said, and walked out. The smear arrived right on schedule. A burner blog posted exclusive bank records implying Sullivan had taken payments from Hartman Construction, a laughable Photoshop, but poisonous. Lena killed it in 2 moves. She pulled Sullivan's actual bank logs under warrant and posted them through the federal docket, then released metadata proving the smear images were composited from Mason Lee's old drives. The thread died mid-trending, suffocated by timestamps. "Serial killer myth is easier to sell than a spreadsheet," Lena said. "But a clean spreadsheet still wins." Afternoon brought a transfer. Ramirez would be moved to a federal facility 3 hours away. Everyone knew it was risky. Every convoy in this crime thriller felt like a moving target. Sullivan planned 2 vans, one loud and one invisible, then put Ramirez in neither. Monroe chartered a medical helicopter from a county field while the decoys rolled under escort. An SUV tried to pinch the lead van on the causeway, failed, and kissed a guardrail. No injuries, no rescue. The chopper reached clouds. Back at the hospital, Richard Hartman coughed himself awake. He looked 30 years older and exactly his age. Sarah stood by the bed, fingers white around a cup of ice chips. When she stepped out for air, Richard tugged Sullivan's sleeve. "I signed," he rasped. "I didn't ask. That's the same thing as knowing." "Names," Sullivan said. Richard stared at the wall. "Garner sent a boy with forms. The body wasn't Ramirez, I knew. I told myself the state knew better. People like me always tell ourselves that." He closed his eyes. "Tell Sarah I'm sorry. It won't help, but tell her anyway." Sullivan carried the apology to the hallway. Sarah listened, swallowed, and nodded once. "He's late," she said. "But I'll take late over never." By dusk, the legal war escalated. The AG petitioned an appellate court to claw back Monroe's order. Monroe filed his own motion with audio exhibits. A 3-minute clip of Ramirez instructing the deputy counsel to pressure the appeals boy. It turned a motion into a confession. The appellate panel set a hearing for the morning and asked the state why its office was on tape. The state did not have a lovely answer. That night, Ms. Cortez brewed coffee for the 3rd straight shift while Claudia set up a little factory on the library's back table. Mirror, hash, sign, seal. "It's not glamorous," she said, tapping labels, "but forensic evidence becomes bulletproof by being boring." Sullivan scrolled through one last folder on the recorder, calls marked insurance. Ramirez had recorded not just orders but backup plans. One of them curdled the room, a discussion with a lobbyist about turning the detective into the story if the tapes ever surfaced. "Find a vice," the lobbyist said. "If there isn't one, rent one." They'd tried. It hadn't stuck. Close to midnight, a new East Fence ping slipped through the net. Flip narrative in court, power outage plus rumor of bomb, building clears, records lost. Monroe traced it to the same Capitol hub, then to a burner near a utility substation. "We'll put eyes on the grid," he said. "You put eyes on paper." Paper has eyes now, Lena said, gesturing at the wall of affidavits, logs, and chain seals. It watches back. Sullivan drove to St. Jude's, hung his suit jacket on a pew, and sat in the dark long enough to hear the bell shift in the rafters. Pastor Cole slid into the next seat with his shoes making no sound. Confessions are heavy, the pastor said. Sometimes they land on the wrong people. We're moving them to the right shoulders, Sullivan replied, one file at a time. Emily wrote her confession in a journal, the pastor said. You're writing yours into a docket. Both are scripture if people choose to read, Sullivan said. By dawn, the plan was set. Noon, they would move the recorder under escort across the courthouse to a sealed hearing, play 3 key calls into the record, then file the rest under the protective order with press partners ready to publish the final confession files at the stroke of the gavel. No midnight fireworks, no rooftop shooter, no theatrical shocking twist. Just names and timestamps and a town stepping over its own shadow. At 11, a courthouse clerk texted Lena a single line. They want the lights. A minute later, a substation camera caught 2 figures vaulting a fence. Monroe's team hit the site before the bolts loosened. The figures ran, stumbled in tall grass, surrendered to a dog that didn't believe in plea bargains. In their pocket, a folded map of the courthouse breaker room and a page that read, If lights fail, start rumor. If rumor fails, start fire. Rumor fails today, Sullivan said. He walked the recorder across the marble like it was a heart headed for a transplant. In the hearing room, the judge checked the seals, checked the hashes, checked the chain. Claudia authenticated the copy procedure in sentences so plain they sounded like prayer. Monroe cued the first clip, Evelyn's command about Rachel, and pressed play. The room went still, then smaller. The second clip, Margaret setting the garden meeting for Emily, a stir, then tears. The third, Ramirez laughing as he moved money with his voice. When it ended, the judge didn't look at anyone for a long 10 seconds. Then he said, We proceed. Outside, Riverton waited with phones held high. Inside, the final confession had left rooms with fewer places to lie. Sullivan glanced at Lena, at Sarah, at Claudia. None of them smiled. They were tired in the way that feels like truth. His phone vibrated. One more message from the hub that had haunted the town. Sadapt. Market closed. Open elsewhere. He typed back without thinking. Names follow. Light travels. He put the phone away and looked at the recorder sitting quiet on the evidence cart. The mastermind had been exposed. The structure had been named. The unsolved murder mystery was finally solvable. The dark secrets cataloged in dull, devastating order. There would be appeals and speeches and donations sent to new offices with new seals. But Riverton had done the hardest thing a wounded place can do. It had chosen the boring courage of the record over the thrilling convenience of a myth. The finale was coming. It did not need fireworks. It needed a gavel and a town that didn't flinch when it echoed. The courthouse echo of Ramirez's voice lingered long after the hearing ended. Reporters sprinted for the steps, tripping over one another to shout questions about the murder-for-hire confession tapes and the shocking mastermind revelation. For the first time since Emily's body was pulled from the river, Riverton wasn't whispering. It was shouting. Sullivan didn't join the crowd. He stood by a second-floor window, cigarette unlit, watching phones glow like candles in the square. Lena leaned against the sill beside him. You realize what we just did? We didn't just prove who ordered the murders. We proved Riverton wasn't an accident, it was a business model. He nodded slowly. And we didn't kill it, we just showed people the invoice. Claudia joined them, laptop tucked under her arm, face pale but resolute. The recorder had more than we played in court, whole folders labeled insurance. I cloned them all. Some of these names aren't Riverton, they're bigger. Judges, lobbyists, donors, Sullivan muttered. Ramirez built an empire on silence. Lena's voice was bitter. And Emily Hartman broke it with a notebook. By evening, Riverton burned in headlines. True crime thriller exposes statewide corruption. Forensic evidence links mastermind to murder for hire ring. Dark secrets of small-town America finally revealed. Sarah watched the coverage from Ms. Cortez's apartment, curled on the couch with Emily's journal open on her lap. She'd be laughing, she whispered. Emily would say, "I told you the truth would outrun them." Sullivan sat across from her, exhausted but steady. She'd also remind you this isn't over. Ramirez didn't run a stall by himself. East fence is still open. Sarah's eyes welled. Then close it. End it for her. That night, Monroe called an emergency strategy session. The recorder's insurance files named officials far beyond Riverton. But buried in the metadata was a chilling detail. Timestamps indicating Ramirez had logged into East Fence only days before his arrest. He wasn't just funding, Monroe said. He was still active, meaning the hub is live, meaning someone else is already sitting in his chair. Lena frowned. So Ramirez wasn't the end. He was the doorway. Sullivan ground his cigarette into the table. Then we walked through it. The next morning, Riverton woke to an eerie calm. Margaret's health collapsed further. Doctors said she might not survive the week. Evelyn appeared in court again, calm as ever, denying everything despite her voice on tape. James was transferred to state custody, shackled and silent. Daniel was gone. Richard unconscious, the family empire a ruin of pearls and ashes. But Ramirez's smirk during transport replayed in Sullivan's mind. "I handed you your death warrant." Sullivan knew it was a warning. Someone bigger than Riverton still wanted the case buried. The attack came sooner than expected. Claudia was walking home from the station when a van screeched to a stop. Two masked figures lunged, trying to shove her inside. She screamed, fought, kicked the laptop free onto the pavement. The commotion drew neighbors out, lights flicking on. The attackers bolted, van tires screaming into the night. When Sullivan and Lena arrived, Claudia was shaken but alive, clutching her laptop like a lifeline. "They didn't want me," she gasped. "They wanted this, the files." Monroe arrived minutes later, jaw tight. "Ramirez may be in custody, but East Fence still pays its bills. This was a cleanup attempt." Sullivan put a hand on Claudia's shoulder. "Then we protect the files better than they protect their secrets." The next day, Sarah finally spoke publicly. Standing in front of St. Jude's, flanked by Pastor Cole and Lena, she addressed the crowd. Her voice trembled but carried. "My sister Emily was killed because she believed truth mattered more than power. I stayed silent, and my silence nearly killed me too, but not anymore. You've heard the recordings, you've seen the lies. This isn't just Riverton's story, it's a warning. Silence is complicity. Truth is survival." Applause erupted, some angry shouts mixing in, but Sarah stood firm. Reporters swarmed, hashtags exploded, shown justice for Emily, shown truth vs deception, shown dark pulse files. Sullivan watched from the steps, cigarette glowing, and for the first time in months felt something close to pride. That night he opened Emily's journal one last time. The final page was nearly blank. A single line scrawled in her hurried hand. "The story ends when you stop asking who benefits from silence." He whispered into the empty squad room. "We're still asking, Emily." Then his phone buzzed. A new message, no sender. "Adapt. Market moves. Truth delayed." Sullivan exhaled smoke. Not delayed, just cornered. Lena entered, reading the message over his shoulder. They're still out there. Good, Sullivan said, because so are we. The next step was clear. Ramirez had confessed yes, but East Fence was bigger than one man. The final confession had opened the door. Now Sullivan and his team had to walk through it, into the deeper shadows where truth and deception kept playing their deadly game, and Riverton would never be the same again. Riverton moved like a wounded animal, alert, suspicious, ready to bolt. The day after the hearing, the square filled with signs and phones set to record. The words murder mystery, true crime, and final confession pulsed from every screen. Sullivan kept his distance, circling the courthouse as if checking a fence for weak planks. Lena matched his pace, eyes on rooftops that had learned to hide rifles and rumors. Ramirez opened the door, she said. Who walks through it first, the law or the next buyer? The record, he answered. If we keep it loud enough, buyers hate the light. Claudia called from the mobile lab. She had run the recorder's insurance files through speech to text and mapped each name to a date, a payment, a phone. Forensic evidence is a language, she said. We're fluent now. One cluster glowed red around a Capitol gala, a fund claiming youth literacy but routing money to East Fence. The board chair, a judge rumored for a higher bench. Agent Monroe looped them in on a call. We seized the fund at 4, he said. Civil forfeiture first, then indictments. Ramirez sang enough for probable cause, but if they trigger a blackout or a rumor, same playbook, our case staggers. So we make boring exciting, Sullivan said. Paper beats fireworks. He stopped by St. Jude's to warn Pastor Cole that crowds might spill toward the church again. The pastor brewed coffee and listened. I keep thinking of Emily, he said. She didn't pray for victory. She prayed not to be afraid of the truth. Then we'll borrow her prayer, Sullivan said. By afternoon, the smear machine tried one more spin. A talk host cried, "Witch hunt." An anonymous account posted a clipped audio of Sullivan saying serial killer, a 16-second splice stripped of context. Lena answered with the full minute time-stamped, and the clip died, crushed by the dull gravity of longer tape. At 3:59, Monroe's team executed the warrant on the literacy fund, account locks, mirror drives, a hallway interview with a treasurer who wept when she saw what her signature had blessed. We wanted books for kids, she said. They bought bullets for men. The story traveled faster than the wire transfers ever had. That evening, Margaret Hartman's heart surrendered. Sarah received the call in Ms. Cortez's apartment and didn't cry at first. She sat very still, Emily's journal open to a page underlined, "Family isn't a shield, it's a mirror." She chose, Sarah said at last. And now I will too. She asked Sullivan for a ride to the station. They took the long way. On Main Street, people stepped back to let Sarah pass. No one shouted. Some nodded. On the station steps, she said, "I'll read a victim statement when it's time. But I won't ask for mercy." He didn't argue. Claudia met them inside with another map. "East Fence nodes we can hit next," she said. 3 law firms, 2 security contractors, 1 lobbying shop. Cut the cash, the marketplace chokes. "Start with the lobby," Sullivan said. "They write the scripts." Night fell hard. A transformer popped on the edge of town, lights dimming long enough to make people hold their breath. Backup kicked in. The rumor engine revved, texts about bombs, posts about buses of agitators, but the town had learned the taste of manipulation. Miss Cortez posted a photo of kids reading in the library, captioned, "Open late, bring your card." It outperformed Fear by 10,000 views. At midnight, Ramirez requested another meeting. Through glass, he looked tired. "You'll never protect everyone on those tapes," he said. "Some give big money to hospitals and churches. Burn them and you burn your budgets." "Budgets can be rebuilt," Sullivan said. "The dead can't." "You think this is a morality play?" "It's math," Ramirez said. "Power is a ledger." "Then we'll refigure the sums," Sullivan answered and left him. Just before dawn, Lena shook him awake on the squad room couch. "Monroe pulled location data from the hub's backup," she said. "One last Riverton address appears on the admin log, a storage unit by the rail spur. It pinged the hour Price died." They rolled with 2 cars and no sirens. The unit door rattled up to the smell of dust and coolant. Inside, a rack of cheap servers, a folding table with a laminator, a box of burner phones, and a corkboard of names written small. Claudia's eyes widened. A local mirror. If the capital went dark, they could run a skeleton market from here. Sullivan bagged the burners while Lena shot the cereals. In a crate, he found a drawer of ordinary objects that weren't ordinary anymore. Motel key sleeves, blank church donation envelopes, courthouse visitor stickers, each pre-printed with dates around major moves. "The structure hired our rituals," he said softly. "Even kindness." They carried the rack into daylight. Miss Cortez arrived with a dolly. Pastor Cole brought coffee and a blessing not tied to any outcome. Sarah came last, holding Emily's journal like a hand. They weren't a strike team. They were the town. Sullivan set the servers on the evidence cart and looked at Lena. "We closed Section 9 today," he said. "No fireworks, just switches." She smiled wearily. "A finale without fire." "Not yet," he said. "That's tomorrow." He turned the key on the cart and pushed. The wheels squeaked down the hall toward a judge who had learned to love hashes. Outside, the square looked different, split, loud, but tilted toward light. Phones filmed the cart like a parade float for boring truth. The algorithm did its mercy and boosted it anyway. Riverton didn't heal. Towns don't, not the way stories pretend. But it steadied. As the courthouse doors opened for another hearing, Sullivan felt the weight of a final confession settling into the record where it could not be charmed or burned. Tomorrow would be Section 10. Tonight, the mastermind sat in a cell. The marketplace bled customers, and the town that almost died of lies chose to live with paperwork. By sunrise, Riverton smelled of rain and burnt coffee. The square was quieter than it had been in months. But quiet didn't mean peace. It meant people were waiting to see if the revelations would stick. Sullivan stepped out of the courthouse into the cool air, cigarette dangling, eyes tired but sharp. He knew Section 9 of this long ordeal was closing, but the final confession hadn't yet been absorbed. Ramirez's arrest, the tapes, the burned East Fence servers. It was all fragile. Truth had been exposed, yes, but survival was another matter. Inside, Sarah sat at a wooden bench, Emily's journal open on her knees. She read a single line aloud, voice breaking. "The story ends when you stop asking who benefits from silence." She looked up at Sullivan. "She left us a blueprint, but if we stop now, it's wasted." Sullivan exhaled smoke into the rafters. "We won't stop, but the bigger this gets, the more dangerous it becomes. Ramirez was only one face of a structure that keeps finding new masks." Claudia arrived, laptop warm, eyes heavy from another sleepless night. The insurance files weren't just about Riverton. They had schedules for meetings in Chicago, New Orleans, even D.C. East Fence was running in plain sight. If we publish everything, we scorch more than this town. We scorch the state. "Good," Lena said firmly. "Truth isn't polite." Monroe leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Polite or not, we can't just dump classified evidence online, but we can use it to pull federal indictments. That means a paper war, not a street one. Which is safer for Riverton? Sullivan gave a humorless laugh. Safer until they cut the lights again, or whisper another rumor about bombs. That afternoon, the state tried one last maneuver. The Attorney General filed an emergency appeal demanding Ramirez's recordings be sealed and suppressed. The argument was that unverified audio may prejudice the jury. But Claudia came armed. She laid out the hash values, the forensic imaging protocols, the timestamps cross-checked with utility logs. Her testimony was dry, technical, boring, exactly what the court needed. The judge denied the appeal. Reporters sprinted out of the courthouse screaming headlines, "Forensic evidence holds. Ramirez tapes stay public." The final confession had survived its first trial by fire. At dusk, Evelyn demanded to speak. Cameras weren't allowed, but her voice leaked anyway. "Victor Ramirez is a liar. Those tapes are doctored. I never ordered Rachel Carter's death. I never paid for Emily Hartman's silence. This is a political witch hunt, designed to destroy my family." But her voice cracked at the end. For the first time, the mask slipped. Sarah listened from the gallery, jaw clenched. When Evelyn was escorted out, Sarah whispered to Sullivan, "She's still smiling, still pretending she's untouchable." "Let her," Sullivan replied. "The tape already told the truth." Now that night, Riverton held its breath again. Ms. Cortez kept the library open late, neighbors trickling in to sit quietly among the stacks. Pastor Cole lit candles at St. Jude's, leaving the side door unlocked. Claudia mirrored another round of drives to off-site servers, sealing them with labels that read Riverton, Final Revelation. Sullivan and Lena walked the quiet streets checking shadows. Every corner looked like a threat. Every parked car felt like a trap. But nothing came. Maybe, Sullivan thought, the game had finally run out of pieces. Near midnight, Sarah asked to visit Emily's grave. They went together, Sullivan and Lena, a few steps behind her as she knelt in the damp grass. She read from the journal, voice soft but steady. "You were right, Emily. Truth was dangerous, but it lived. They tried to kill it, and it lived. You can rest now." Sullivan lit a cigarette, staring at the river. "She gave us the map," he said quietly to Lena. "We just followed it step by step." "And every step cost someone," Lena replied. "Emily, Jonas, Daniel, Chief Hal, Garner, Price, all of them." Sullivan nodded. "Truth's ledger is written in blood. That's what Ramirez never understood. It's not profitable, it's priceless." And the next morning, Riverton didn't wake with riots or rumors. It woke with silence that felt different this time. Not fear, but exhaustion. Shopkeepers opened blinds. Kids biked down Main Street without glancing at rooftops. People spoke Emily's name without whispering. The final confession hadn't healed Riverton, but it had broken the silence. And that, Sullivan thought, was enough. By noon, Monroe confirmed indictments were filed against Ramirez, Evelyn, James, and several state officials named on the tapes. Margaret's death certificate was signed. Daniel's body was released. Richard remained in ICU, unresponsive. The Hartman-Whitmore dynasty was finished. Sarah gave her victim impact statement quietly, with no theatrics. Emily wanted Riverton to be honest again. That's all I want, too. No more secrets, no more lies. The courtroom stayed hushed, no shouts, no chaos, just the quiet echo of a truth that finally had weight. Sullivan walked out of the courthouse into crisp air. Reporters pressed forward, microphones eager, asking about the tapes, the murders, the dark secrets of Riverton. He didn't answer. He just lit a cigarette and walked toward the river. Lena caught up, sliding her hand into her coat pocket. "It's over, isn't it?" He shook his head. "Not over. Just recorded." In the library that night, Sarah closed Emily's journal for the last time. She placed it on the shelf where Emily used to sit between crime novels and history books. Ms. Cortez locked the glass case around it. A placard read, "Emily Hartman's Journal, Truth Against Silence." Sullivan stood in the back, unseen, and finally let himself breathe. The final confession had been spoken. The mastermind had been exposed. Riverton's darkest chapter was in the record now, boring and undeniable. And in a town that once thrived on lies, boring truth was the bravest ending of all. Final revelation. The truth behind Riverton murders. Riverton finally sounded like a town again. Delivery trucks at dawn, a dog barking at a mail carrier. The river shouldering past the bridge without carrying secrets. Yet every storefront still held a reflection of the true crime months that had scorched its name across the map. Flyers for a memorial, a sign about counseling hours, a jar labeled Emily's Library Fund. The murder mystery that began with one woman's body had become a ledger of choices. Now the final revelation had to be lived, not just proven. Detective Sullivan arrived at St. Antoine Jude's before the candles were lit. Pastor Cole was already there, sleeves rolled, straightening folding chairs for a vigil that wasn't for one victim, but all of them. Emily, Rachel, Tom, Helen, Chief Hal, Philip, Victor's John Doe stand-in, Jonas, Eric, Mason, even Daniel. "We don't sort grief by guilt," the pastor said. "We just count the cost." Sullivan nodded. "Cost is what's left when the forensic evidence goes quiet." Lena found him on the steps, hair pulled back. A notebook she hadn't needed in days tucked in her jacket. Monroe's office confirmed. Ramirez is remanded without bail. The deputy counsel flipped. The lobbyist pled out. The literacy fund is frozen. James faces attempted murder and conspiracy. Evelyn got the big charges: murder, racketeering, witness tampering. She paused. She's still not cracking on camera. She doesn't crack, Sullivan said. She curates. He flicked ash into the gravel, then stopped himself and ground the cigarette out carefully. But the confession tapes cracked the myth. Serial killer doesn't play here anymore. Inside the nave, Ms. Cortez arranged a small display beneath the stained glass. Emily's journal under glass, a photocopy of Rachel's last grant application, a page of Chief Hal's handwritten shift notes, Philip's lab lanyard, Jonas's fountain pen. A caption read, "Truth Against Silence." People drifted by in quiet, reading the timeline that had replaced rumor. Dates, names, amounts, the boring scaffolding of a crime thriller ending that didn't need fireworks to be final. At the back, Claudia set a laptop on a chair and ran through slides she'd show the grand jury again if anyone tried to rewrite history. Hashes, checksums, chain of custody seals. Her cheek was still purple where a gloved hand had tried to erase her. She tapped the glass above Emily's notebook. Everything that mattered began as ink and paper, she said to no one and everyone. That's the part they never planned for. A woman stepped from the aisle and touched Claudia's shoulder. Sullivan recognized the jaw, the emergency room calm, the clerk who called herself deep archivist the night she handed them the backup VHS. For months she'd stayed nameless. Today she carried a sworn statement. "I'll put my name on the record," she said, voice soft but steady. "Marla Jensen. I filed the copy because my boss told me not to keep one." That sounded like a command designed for regret. "Welcome to the light, Ms. Jensen," Lena said, signing the receipt and filing her courage into the docket where it would outlive tweets. At noon, the first true crowd of the day packed the library. Not press, families. kids who had seen their school year punctured by sirens and wanted a different sound. Ms. Cortez wheeled in a cart of paperbacks. Sarah Hartman, older by a decade and a season, stood at the front and read the dedication of the Emily Hartman Program for Student Whistleblowers and Research Grants. My sister believed the dark secrets of powerful people didn't excuse the rest of us from telling the truth, she said. This fund buys notebooks and time. She looked at Sullivan. You said once the ledger wasn't money, it was blood. I want ours to be ink. After, Sarah handed him an envelope. For the record, she said. Inside, a victim impact addendum, the last piece of testimony she hadn't yet found words for. He didn't read it there. Some things could wait until the river had reminded him how to breathe. Monroe called in the afternoon. Appellate court denied the AG's emergency petition. The final revelation files stand. Federal indictments unsealed at 4. He hesitated. One more thing. Ramirez's last insurance folder mentions a contingency if he's arrested, a smear against Claudia and Sarah using doctored lab images and an infidelity rumor. It's laughable. It will still trend. It'll die the way the last one died, Lena said, under a spreadsheet. Then keep printing, Monroe replied. Paper beats plagiarism. Sullivan walked Main Street while the indictments hit the wires. He passed the diner where Jonas never finished his coffee, the high school where Eric's car burned, the pool where Helen slipped beneath chlorinated light, the cemetery road where Chief Hal was baited with a text about journals, the garden lot where Margaret sent Emily to a meeting with a man paid to make accidents. He wasn't sightseeing. He was mapping a town that could finally tell itself the truth without choking. At the Hartman estate, a locksmith swapped in new deadbolts while an estate attorney inventoried pearls and debts. Daniel's room sat neat for the first time in years. Richard's bed at the hospital remained surrounded by machines. Sullivan stopped at the nurse's desk and left a note with 2 sentences. Your apology was heard. Your silence is not an inheritance. He didn't know whether Richard would wake to read it. He knew it needed to exist. Evening returned everyone to St. Jude's. The vigil wasn't theatrical. No long speeches, just names spoken aloud, each followed by the single word the whole town had been avoiding, present. Emily Hartman, present. Rachel Carter, present. Tom Bradley, present. Helen Myers, present. Philip Garner, present. Chief Hal Peterson, present. Mason Lee, present. Eric Bennett, present. Jonas Price, present. Even the John Doe whose toe tag bought Ramirez his first death, present, because truth refused to let a stranger be unnamed. When it was over, Pastor Cole nodded to Sullivan. One more confession, he said, and handed over a small notebook from the church lost and found box. Inside, Daniel's hurried scrawl from a night he couldn't sleep. I thought fear was love in a different suit. I was wrong. Love is the door you open when the knock terrifies you. It wasn't absolution. It was inventory. On the steps, Evelyn's supporters tried one last chant, something about witch hunts and political theater. It dwindled not from force, but from fatigue. Even argument wants a new script after a while. James, 2 counties away, had reportedly asked for a Bible and a pencil. Margaret's obituary ran 3 inches without adjectives. Ramirez spent the hour asking his attorney for a different venue, as if geography could forgive arithmetic. Night came in like a kindness. Lena leaned against the rail looking at the river. You know the ending you promised? She said. No fireworks, just names and time stamps. I think we're there. Sullivan lit a cigarette he didn't intend to finish. Not there. Courtrooms are slow. Appeals are slower. Small-town corruption can move to a bigger town with a new suit. He blew out smoke. But the story we can control, that one closed the way it should. Sarah joined them, hand on the journal through the glass. Emily wrote, "Don't give Riverton fear. Give it names. Give it light." Today the library was full. "That's light," Sullivan nodded. "And names." They stood until the candles guttered low. Across the square, Ms. Cortez locked the library, then set the spare key on the plaque beneath Emily's display. Claudia walked past with a box labeled Evidence, authenticated, and smiled like a bruise finally learning it could fade. Pastor Cole turned the church lights down to a warm, survivable glow. Sullivan pocketed the cigarette, unheard of, and buttoned his coat. "Tomorrow we write the last pieces," he said. "Sentencing memos, property returns, custody logs, the kind of paperwork that makes a crime thriller ending stick." "And after that?" Lena asked. "After that," he said, "Riverton gets to be boring." In a town that had mistaken quiet for consent, boring sounded like a miracle. Morning in Riverton didn't feel cinematic anymore. The square that once pulsed with protest chants and camera flashes was subdued, like a stage after the curtain has dropped. Storefronts reopened, children dragged backpacks to buses. Headlines still screamed final revelation, murder mystery solved, mastermind exposed. But the town was no longer acting in a thriller. It was surviving one. Sullivan stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, sipping coffee gone cold. Lena joined him, carrying a thin folder. "Judge just scheduled sentencing hearings. Evelyn's in 2 weeks, James a month. Ramirez. Federal trial date pending, but no bail." She flipped the folder open. "The DA wants victim impact statements updated for the record." Sullivan rubbed his jaw. "Sarah's already written hers, Claudia too. The rest, ghosts don't write, but they weigh plenty." They stepped back inside, the air thick with disinfectant and dust. Monroe was already waiting. Tie loosened, eyes bloodshot from another night on calls. "East Fence chatter dropped off overnight," he said. "We think the hub closed, or at least went quiet enough to look closed." "Market's moving," Sullivan muttered. "Not dying. They'll open a stall in another town." "Probably," Monroe admitted. "But Riverton's ledger is closed. That counts." But later that day, Sarah walked into the library, flanked by Ms. Cortez and Pastor Cole. Reporters angled for quotes, but she held her chin high and ignored them. She sat at the long oak table where Emily once scribbled notes. Slowly, she opened the journal again. "This will be my last statement," she said, voice carrying across the stacks. "Emily believed silence was poison. She died because others believed silence was safety. I won't make that mistake again. I've told the truth. It's written, and when the court reads it, Riverton won't forget who we lost." The crowd applauded softly, a reverent kind of applause. Ms. Cortez locked the journal back in its case, this time with an additional plaque, on loan from the Hartman family to remain in Riverton Public Library permanently. At dusk, Sullivan drove to the hospital. Richard Hartman still lay unconscious, machines keeping rhythm where his heart faltered. Sullivan sat beside the bed, watching the lines rise and fall. "You had a chance to stop this," he murmured. "Maybe you thought loyalty was love. Maybe you thought silence was survival. But Sarah deserves better than apologies from machines." He left a folded note on the bedside table. "Emily's truth lives. Don't waste what's left." When he walked out, Sarah was waiting in the hallway. "I don't forgive him," she said, voice steady. "But I want him to know I lived." The following week, Riverton's courthouse filled again, not with rioters or chants, but with the quieter noise of bureaucracy. The DA filed motions, federal agents shuffled evidence boxes, the judge set trial logistics. Headlines moved from shocking twist to sentencing dates confirmed. Claudia sat in the gallery, laptop open, updating files with meticulous timestamps. Lena leaned over her shoulder. Why keep relabeling? The copies are already sealed. Because every time someone questions chain of custody, Claudia said, I want to hand them a stack so boring they fall asleep before they finish. She smirked faintly. Truth is safest when it's dull. That evening, Sullivan and Lena walked through the rain-soaked streets, coats pulled tight. They stopped at the diner where Jonas had died in his car. The neon sign flickered, unchanged, as if mocking the idea of closure. They'll tear this place down eventually, Lena said quietly. People won't want the reminder. Leave it, Sullivan replied. Reminders matter. Forgetting is what let it start. He tapped ash into a puddle, watching the ripples fade. Emily wrote it down because she knew memory rots. Paper lasts. That's the difference between gossip and history. Days later, Monroe called them into his office. He held up a single envelope. From Ramirez. He asked that it be delivered to you, Detective. Sullivan frowned, tore it open, and read the single line. Truth is temporary. Deception is renewable. No signature, but Ramirez's handwriting unmistakable. Lena scowled. He's still playing the game. Sullivan folded the note, tucked it into his pocket. Then we stopped letting him set the rules. Truth isn't temporary if you write it in stone. When the town began its own quiet rituals of survival. Pastor Cole held a service naming every victim again, this time followed by bells instead of silence. Ms. Cortez organized a book drive for the Emily Hartman Fund. Claudia lectured at the high school science class about digital forensics, holding up the battered laptop she'd saved from a van door. This isn't a weapon, she told the students. It's armor. Armor against lies. Sarah spoke once more, not in court, but at the town square. Her words were simple. We lived through deception. Now we choose truth. Don't let Riverton fall quiet again. The crowd responded not with cheers, but with nods, small affirmations that sounded like healing. That night, Sullivan sat alone at the riverbank. The bridge loomed in shadow, the same place Emily had been found months ago. He lit a cigarette, watching the ember glow in the dark. Emily's last line echoed in his head. Don't give Riverton fear, give it names, give it light. He whispered into the night. We did, Emily. We gave them both. For once the river didn't feel like a grave. It felt like a mirror. By the time the leaves browned along the river path, Riverton had learned a new ritual. Read the docket, breathe, then go back to work. The headline still said final revelation and murder mystery ending. But the people were practicing something harder. Ordinary days. Sullivan liked the sound of them. Ordinary days made room for names to be spoken without a wince. He started at the library. Ms. Cortez had pinned a sign above the glass case. Please whisper near Emily's journal. Truth is trying to rest. Kids lined up with new cards from the Emily Hartman Fund, clutching paperbacks like passports. Sarah sat at a side table, drafting scholarship guidelines in careful blue ink. When she looked up, her eyes carried the ache of a storm that had passed and the patience to mop the floor afterwards. Judge moved Evelyn's hearing up, Lena said, joining them with coffee. 2 days? The DA wants us there. Public wants a true crime ending. Court wants a record. Records last, Sullivan said. He walked to the station, wrote a memo no one would read except the future. The route of the recorder from evidence cart to courtroom, every signature, each minute noted. Boring, he thought, and smiled. Boring had saved Riverton. That night he visited Richard Hartman again. Monitors hummed. A nurse set down charts and retreated. "Sarah is writing grants," Sullivan said softly. "She found a life that doesn't need your permission." He placed a single library card on the tray. "When you wake, start with chapter 1. On the way out, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, no punctuation. Just a sentence that could have been a dare or a prayer. "Let the light keep walking." He didn't answer. The light had feet now. Evelyn's hearing drew more people than pews. The courtroom smelled like wool and rain. She wore county beige with the posture of a gala chairwoman. Her lawyers argued mitigation like a lullaby. Charity galas, youth programs, leadership during crisis. The judge listened. Then he called for victim statements. Sarah stood, hands steady. "You taught a town to confuse fear with order," she said. "You strangled a woman who wouldn't lie for you." "My sister isn't a headline. She's the reason this room still believes in words." She stepped back without looking at Evelyn. Claudia read next, voice precise. "Forensic evidence is not partisan. Chains of custody don't vote. You tried to make truth pick a team, it didn't." Pastor Cole spoke for those who had no families to stand for them. "Justice is not revenge," he said. "It is memory with consequences." When the judge addressed Evelyn, the room tilted toward silence. "Power used to erase accountability as a violence beyond the act," he said. "You curated a myth to make murder administratively neat." He sentenced her to life without parole on the murder count, consecutive years on the racketeering, tampering, and solicitation charges. No cameras, but everyone would remember the sound of the gavel anyway. Outside, the square didn't cheer. It exhaled. Headlines said shocking twist, life sentence, small town corruption punished, final revelation affirmed. Sullivan didn't read them. He walked the block once and found himself at the bridge where wind finally smelled like river again. Later, Monroe called from the Capitol. "East Fence indictments expanded," he said. 3 more offices, 2 contractors, 1 lobby shop. The marketplace lost its hallway. They'll rebuild somewhere, but not on our watch. "Markets move," Sullivan said. "So does daylight." He hung up and found Lena waiting on the station steps, rain glittering in her hair. "You look lighter," she said. "Records are heavy," he answered. "Setting them down helps." She handed him a single-page printout. Sarah asked for this to be posted at the library and the church. It was the fund's first call for proposals. Small research grants for students investigating local history, oversight, environmental questions. The heading read, "Dark Secrets, Bright Work." "Good title," he said. "Hi, CTR," she teased, and he laughed for the first time without apology. Sullivan woke before dawn to a text from Monroe. Ramirez pled to federal counts 1 through 4, allocution at 10. In court, Ramirez finally spoke without smirk. He admitted the fake death, the payments, the hub. He tried to call it business, and the judge corrected him. It was murder bought wholesale. Ramirez swallowed the line in the years that followed it. When the hearing ended, Sullivan returned to the river and opened Sarah's envelope at last. Her addendum wasn't a flourish. It was a ledger of gratitude. Ms. Cortez for the backups, Claudia for the boredom, Monroe for the warrants, Pastor Cole for the unlocked door, Lena for the stubbornness, and 1 line for him. "You taught me truth could be patient without becoming quiet." He folded it carefully and put it where he kept his badge. Afternoon brought a different kind of crowd to the square. Not cameras, kids with notebooks holding a scavenger list Sarah had written. Find the first brick laid at the courthouse, the oldest tree by the water, the plaque with the wrong date. The story your grandmother won't tell until you ask twice. A town-sized true crime lesson without blood. A suspense thriller powered by curiosity instead of fear. As the sun slid down, Sullivan stood with Lena outside St. Jude's. "One more page tomorrow," he said. "Sentences for James, property returns, a bench dedication by the river." "The ending without fireworks," she said. "Just names and timestamps," he replied. "And room for boring days." From the church, bells marked the hour. From the library window, a reflection held the journal like a candle. From the river, a breeze carried the quiet confidence of a town that had chosen light. And for the first night in months, Sullivan walked home without checking the rooftops, the alleys, or his back. The final revelation wasn't a twist anymore. It was a map. The last week of hearings arrived with less noise than anyone expected. Reporters still lined the sidewalks, but their questions had dulled. The crime thriller climax had already played out. Ramirez in cuffs, Evelyn sentenced. Sarah's testimony cemented. What remained was paperwork. Sentencing memos, property returns, restitution schedules. Boring, but necessary. The kind of boring that Emily had dreamed about in her journal. Sullivan walked the courthouse halls, listening not for shouts or gunshots, but for the shuffle of clerks with manila folders. Lena joined him, her heels echoing softly. "James is up today," she said. "Attempted murder, conspiracy, obstruction. DA is pushing for 30. 30's enough," Sullivan muttered. "He'll never be mayor again. That's a sentence all its own." When the judge pronounced 35 years, James's face barely moved. He simply adjusted his cuffs as if fixing pearls that weren't there and walked out without looking at anyone. The gallery didn't gasp. They didn't clap. They just breathed, relieved that the Whitmore name no longer carried a crown. And later, Sarah stood outside the library with a microphone she hadn't asked for. The press insisted, and she relented. Her voice carried steady across the square. "This isn't a fairy tale," she said. "It's not a story about villains punished and heroes rewarded. It's a record of what silence costs." Emily's murder was not a mystery, it was an equation. Lies plus money plus fear equals death. We solved the equation, but we can't erase it. What we can do is remember it. Reporters scribbled, hashtags bloomed, and a truth equation turned dark secrets revealed. Justice in Riverton. But Sarah lowered the mic and returned to the library without waiting for applause. She had lived too long in Riverton to trust applause. That night, Sullivan drove out to the quarry where Sarah had nearly died. The floodlights were gone, the gravel still scattered. He lit a cigarette and let the smoke curl into the empty dark. Emily's voice lingered in his head as if the journal were whispering. "Truth is dangerous. Deception is deadly. Don't confuse the two." He whispered back, "We didn't. Not this time." Behind him, Lena's headlights swept across the rocks. She stepped out, coat tight around her shoulders. "Monroe wants us at the Capitol next week. East Fence indictments are expanding. Bigger fish. But..." She looked at the quarry. "I needed to see this place quiet." "It's quieter than it was," Sullivan said, "and that's enough." On the following morning, Pastor Cole held one last vigil. Not for the victims this time, but for the town. He asked no one to speak names aloud. Instead, he passed out blank cards and asked everyone to write one word that described what Riverton had become. The cards filled a basket. Later, Sarah read them aloud in the library. Survivor, scarred, learning, lighter, awake. Sullivan slipped his card in without writing a word. Some truths were better left unsaid. At noon, Claudia presented her final report. She'd cataloged every drive, tape, and transcript into a binder thicker than the town charter. The cover read, "Riverton, Forensic Record of the Murders in Market." "This isn't for headlines," she said, handing copies to the DA, Monroe, and Sarah. "This is so 50 years from now when someone tries to rewrite the story, the math doesn't change. Hash is still hash. Truth still checksums." Sullivan smiled faintly. Boring enough to last. Evening brought the last official act. The town council dedicated a small bench on the river path, brass plaque gleaming in the low sun. "In memory of Emily Hartman, truth against silence." Sarah sat first, hands folded in her lap, then stepped aside so others could. One by one, townspeople paused, touched the plaque, and walked on. Children climbed onto the bench laughing, unaware of its weight. That, Sullivan thought, was the best memorial of all. Later, Lena and Sullivan walked Main Street together. The diner's neon sign glowed steady, the library lights warm, the church bells steady in the distance. For once, Riverton looked ordinary. "Feels strange," Lena said. "Like we're waiting for another twist." Sullivan shook his head. The twist was that there wasn't one. Truth won. Slowly, painfully, boringly. But it won. She smiled. "Boring sounds beautiful." That night, Sullivan packed up his board, the photos, the strings, the pins that had charted every murder and every lie. He pulled the last pin free, leaving the cork bare. He folded Emily's copied journal pages back into a file, slid it into the archive cabinet, and shut the drawer. For the first time in months, his office wall was empty, and empty felt like peace. To the river moved on. So did Riverton. The final revelation was not a thunderclap, but a steady dawn. No fireworks, no cliffhangers, just the quiet truth. A town had faced its darkest secrets, named them, and chosen light. Emily Hartman's voice carried through pages, and sisters and courts had done what bullets and money couldn't. It had survived. And in Riverton, survival was the ending worth writing. And the truth has spoken, but in Riverton every answer left behind another shadow. Dark secrets end here tonight, but remember, another mystery is always waiting. You were listening to Dark Pulse, where true crime meets suspense. Tell us in the comments, which twist shocked you the most? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling crime thrillers. SEO optimized description, 1,000 characters approx. Step into the world of true crime, unsolved murders, and shocking revelations in this suspense thriller that will keep you hooked until the very end. The final confession tells the chilling story of a small American town haunted by multiple murders, betrayal, and a powerful mastermind who hides in plain sight. From mysterious killings to hidden agendas, every twist uncovers a new layer of dark secrets, corruption, and deception. This crime thriller mystery isn't just about finding the killer. It's about exposing the system of lies that protected them. The story unfolds with shocking confessions, forensic evidence, and a final revelation that changes everything. If you love unsolved mysteries, crime stories, and suspense thrillers with shocking endings, this is the story you can't miss. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Dark Pulse for more crime stories, suspense thrillers, and audio crime dramas.